Hello guys, welcome to Fanfic Adventure. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if Naruto was reincarnated as a captain in Soul Society with a dual-wield Kurama Zanpakuto? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Soul That Wouldn't Sit Still. The first thing Naruto noticed about being dead was that it wasn't particularly dramatic. No tunnel of light. No cosmic fanfare. No sage sitting cross-legged on a cloud waiting to hand him a certificate of completion. Just, one moment he was lying in his bed in the Hokage's residence, Hinata's hand warm in his, the smell of early spring coming through the open window, and then the next moment he was standing barefoot in a street that smelled like mud and old wood, wearing clothes he didn't recognize, in a city he'd never seen. He stood there for a good 30 seconds, just blinking. "Ha," he said. The street around him was narrow and crowded, packed with low buildings that leaned against each other like tired old men. People moved past him, souls, though he didn't know that word yet, dressed in rough-spun gray and brown, going about whatever business dead people went about. A cart loaded with vegetables rattled by. A child chased a cat around a corner. Somewhere above the rooftops, birds were arguing. It was, objectively, a completely ordinary scene. Naruto scratched the back of his head and looked down at his hands. Still his hands. Same calluses in the same places. He pressed 2 fingers to his wrist, there was a pulse, which surprised him, and then took a slow breath and felt the air move through him, clean and real. He was 72 years old when he died. He'd known it was coming. A good life, a long one, full to the edges with everything a man could want, he'd made sure of that. He'd made peace with Kurama decades ago, rebuilt the village 3 times over, watched his kids grow, watched his grandkids grow, sat on the Hokage's chair until his back gave out and Konohamaru physically pried him off it. He'd died with Hinata's hand in his and a smile already forming. He'd expected, he didn't know, exactly. He'd expected something, in the way that people who fought gods and demons and the embodiment of despair develop a loose sense of cosmic expectation. He had not expected this. He looked around again, slower this time, with the eyes of someone who'd spent decades reading situations before walking into them. The buildings were old but not ancient. The people were poor, genuinely, structurally poor, the kind of poor that comes from a system rather than hard luck. There was a tension in the way they moved, a practiced smallness, like people who'd learned not to take up too much space. Nobody met his eyes. He'd seen that before. In Konoha, when he was young. Before. "Hey," he said to a passing woman, who was maybe 40 years old and carrying a bundle of laundry that was clearly too heavy for her. She flinched before she even turned around. "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you. Can you tell me where I am?" She looked at him for a moment, really looked at him, which was already more than most people in this street were doing, and her eyes went to his hair. Blonde. Unusual, apparently, because she blinked twice. "Rukongai," she said, like it was obvious. "District 64. Rukongai," he repeated. "And that's where you go," she said simply. Then she shifted her laundry bundle and walked on. He watched her go. Helpful. He found a wall to lean against, an old habit, and took stock. He was dead. He was somewhere. He still felt like himself, which was reassuring. He could still feel Kurama, which was the most surprising part, a warm knot of orange-red energy sitting in his chest where his chakra center used to be, banked down like coals in a hearth, present and patient. He pressed a hand flat against his sternum. "Hey," he thought. "You there?" The response wasn't words. It was a feeling, affirmation, warmth, the faint impression of enormous amber eyes in the dark, watching. Awake. Waiting. Naruto let out a breath. "Okay," he said to himself. "Okay. Let's figure this out." It took him 3 days to understand the basics. He was good at surviving in unfamiliar places, he'd been doing it since he was 12, and he was even better at making people talk to him. He had the kind of face, the kind of presence, that made strangers soften. It wasn't a trick. It had never been a trick. He was just genuinely interested in people, and people could feel it, and they responded. By the end of the first day he'd learned about hollows, which were apparently the malevolent spiritual entities that ate souls, because of course the afterlife had predators. He'd learned about Shinigami, soul reapers, who were sent from a place called Siriidii to fight the hollows and perform something called Konso on souls who needed it. He'd learned that Rukongai was divided into districts numbered 1 through 80, and the higher the number, the worse the conditions. District 64 was unpleasant. District 80, according to a grizzled old man named Hachiro who'd clearly been here a very long time, was something you didn't talk about in casual conversation. By the end of the second day he'd learned that most souls in Rukongai had no memories of their previous lives. They arrived, they woke up, they were just there, without history. He was, apparently, an exception, and people found that unsettling in the way they found anything unusual unsettling, with wary, sideways glances and a tendency to suddenly find something important to do somewhere else. He didn't mind. He'd been unsettling to people before. By the third day he'd found a place to sleep, an abandoned building on the edge of the district that nobody was using because the roof leaked, and had started making himself useful, which was both natural instinct and deliberate strategy. He fixed the old woman's cart when the wheel cracked. He carried things for people. He sat with a small girl who was crying because she didn't remember her mother and couldn't understand where she was, and he talked to her for 2 hours about nothing and everything until she fell asleep. That night, sitting on what remained of his building's roof and watching the stars, which were different here, arranged differently, not quite the pattern he'd memorized over Konoha, he had a long internal conversation with Kurama. It wasn't talking, exactly. It was closer to what they'd developed over decades, a shared space inside him where intent and feeling translated into something like communication, dense and specific and beyond language. He told Kurama what he'd learned. Kurama expressed something that felt like skepticism about the entire situation, which Naruto found very Kurama of him. He asked Kurama what he was, here, whether the Nine-Tails chakra would work the same way, whether the bijou existed anywhere in this world. Kurama's response was layered and complicated. The gist of it, as best Naruto could translate, was, I don't know. But I'm here. And whatever this world runs on, I can feel it. It's not so different from chakra. It's just called something else. Naruto leaned back and looked at the stars. Ryatsu, he said aloud, turning the new word over. Spiritual pressure. It's basically chakra, right? The feeling from Kurama was something like, broadly. Crudely. But yes. Can we use it? A pause. Then, we already are. Naruto pressed his hand to his chest again and felt it, what he'd been feeling since he woke up here, that low warm burn that he'd assumed was just how things felt after death. But now that he paid attention, he could feel it moving, slow and circular, following paths in his body that weren't quite the same as his old chakra network but weren't entirely different either. Like water that had found new channels in the same landscape. He sat with that for a long time. Then a hollow screamed somewhere in the dark, close enough that the birds on the nearest rooftop erupted into panicked flight, and Naruto was on his feet before the thought fully formed, every instinct he'd ever sharpened pointing him toward the sound. The hollow had come for the girl. He didn't know her name, she hadn't told him, and he hadn't pushed, but he recognized her immediately when he came around the corner and found her backed against a building wall, frozen in the particular way that people freeze when they encounter something that their mind is refusing to process. She was maybe 6 years old in appearance. The hollow in front of her was approximately the size of a house. It wasn't one of the enormous ones, no skeletal mask, no grand Fisher nonsense, just a standard hollow, which in this context meant it was about 8 feet tall with a white bone face and too many limbs and a screaming hunger emanating from it like heat from a forge. Its mask had cracked in a jagged line down the center, which meant it was agitated. Hungry. There were 2 Shinigami already on the scene, which Naruto registered as he came around the corner and assessed in approximately 2 seconds. Both of them young, younger than he'd expected, maybe 15 and 17 in apparent age, and both of them thoroughly outmatched. One was already down, crumpled at the base of a wall, still conscious but clearly not getting up anytime soon. The other was on her feet but shaking, her Zanpakuto raised in both hands, her Ryatsu spiking with fear. The hollow swung an arm at her and she dove aside, barely in time, and the arm punched through the wall of the building behind her like it was paper. Naruto was already moving. He didn't think about it. He didn't make a plan. He felt the girl, felt the Shinigami, felt the hollow's Ryatsu, dense and rotten and hungry, and his body just went. Decades of instinct, of muscle memory that had somehow survived death itself. He crossed the distance between him and the hollow in less than a second, planted his foot on the back of the nearest arm mid-swing, ran up the hollow's body with the same casual physics-defying efficiency he'd been using since he was a genin, and grabbed the top of the hollow's mask with both hands. The hollow screeched. It thrashed. It was strong, genuinely, terrifyingly strong, and Naruto felt the force of it through his hands and arms and all the way down his spine, the kind of force that would have launched anyone else into the next district. He dug in and pulled. Not hard enough to break the mask, something told him that wasn't how this worked, that breaking the mask wrong would just scatter the soul and not help anything, but hard enough to drag the hollow's focus off the girl and the injured Shinigami and onto him. "Hey," he said conversationally, hanging off the top of a hollow's head 12 feet above the ground. "I'm going to need you to stop doing that." The hollow's response was to rear back and smash him against the wall. He let go just before impact, dropped to the ground in a roll, came up on his feet in time to watch the hollow turn around. Its mask crack had widened. The hunger rolling off it had sharpened into something that felt almost like recognition, like it could sense what was inside him, the warm foxfire presence, and wanted it desperately and feared it simultaneously. The young female Shinigami had gotten herself together enough to step forward, Zanpakuto raised, which was brave and inadvisable. "Get back," she shouted at him. "You're a Rukongai resident, you can't, your friend is hurt and that thing is about to charge," Naruto said, without looking away from the hollow. "Maybe let's sort out the rules after." The hollow charged. He felt something click. He'd been wondering, in the back of his mind, through 3 days of learning a new world, what form his abilities would take here. Whether they'd work at all. Whether chakra and Ryatsu were compatible enough for the things he used to do to still function. Whether the part of him that was Kurama would translate. He found out. When he brought his hands up, it wasn't chakra that flowed through the familiar motions, but it was close. Ryatsu moved through him differently than chakra had, fuller and more immediate, less about pathways and more about pressure, like the difference between water in pipes and water in open air. But his hands remembered the shape of a Rasengan, and his intent was sharp and clear, and Kurama's fire was right there, right beneath the surface, and a sphere of orange-gold energy formed between his palms. Spinning. Dense. It pulled at the air around it and the ground shook slightly beneath his feet. It was not a Rasengan. It was something else. Something that had taken the shape of a Rasengan because that was the template his hands knew, but was made of something rawer and bigger and older. Kurama's chakra translated into pure Ryatsu, concentrated and furious and bright as a small sun. The hollow didn't slow down. Naruto stepped forward and drove it into the hollow's mask. The sound was not like an explosion. It was like a word spoken in a language that predated language, vast and singular and final. The hollow came apart at the mask and kept coming apart, unraveling from the point of impact outward, and when it was gone there was just Naruto standing in the empty street with his hands still extended, the last traces of orange-gold light fading from the air around him. Silence. The girl was staring at him from against the wall. The standing Shinigami was staring at him. The one on the ground had pushed himself upright against the wall and was also staring at him. Naruto lowered his hand and turned around. "You okay?" he asked the girl. She nodded, very slowly, eyes enormous. "Good." He crossed to the injured Shinigami, crouched down, and looked him over with the practiced eye of someone who'd done battlefield triage since his teens. Broken ribs, probably. Nothing immediately fatal. You need to be carried or can you walk? The boy stared at him. What was that? Not sure yet, Naruto said honestly. Can you walk? Yes. Yes, I think so. The female Shinigami hadn't moved. She was holding her Zanpakuto with both hands and her Ryatsu was doing something complicated, but the fear had gone out of it, replaced by something that felt like the kind of disorientation that precedes a very fundamental recalibration. She was maybe 17, with short dark hair and eyes that were currently too wide for her face. She was looking at him like he was something she needed to file a report about. You dispersed a hollow, she said. Without a Zanpakuto. Without Kido training. You're a Rukongai resident with no Shinigami classification and you just, she stopped. Started again. Who are you? Naruto stood up. Naruto. That's nada, she stopped again. Looked at the space where the hollow had been, which still had faint golden traces in the air. Looked back at him. Made a decision. I'm Abarai Renji, said the injured boy, apparently deciding introductions were the most normal thing to do. Kuchiki Rukia, said the girl with the Zanpakuto, still watching Naruto very carefully. And I'm going to need to report this. Go for it, Naruto said. She blinked. You're not, most people get nervous when a Shinigami says that. He tilted his head slightly. Should I be? She looked at the space where the hollow had been. Back at him. No, she said slowly. I don't think you should. Siriidii was more impressive than he expected and less impressive than it thought it was. It took 2 days for Rukia's report to travel up whatever channels it needed to travel, and another half a day for the response to come down in the form of 4 Shinigami who arrived at District 64 looking official and slightly uncomfortable, which was a combination Naruto recognized from dealing with daimyo their entire lives. They asked him, with carefully neutral politeness, if he would come with them to be assessed. He said yes. Of course he said yes. He'd been waiting for this. Siriidii, seen from the inside, was a place that had decided it was eternal and arranged itself accordingly, white buildings, broad avenues, a sky that seemed higher than it should, an architecture that was beautiful in the way that absolute institutional confidence can be beautiful. It also had the particular atmosphere of a place where hierarchy was the primary organizing principle of reality, where rank was worn and felt and communicated in 100 small ways that most people absorbed without thinking. Naruto noticed all of it and found it mildly interesting. He'd always found power structures interesting, the same way a man who dismantled several of them found them interesting. They brought him to a large assessment room in an administrative building whose exact division he didn't learn, with a high ceiling and bare walls and a single large instrument in the center that looked like a cross between a measuring device and a prayer. Several people were waiting inside. One of them was a woman with a calm face and long dark hair, wearing the white haori of a captain over her black Shinigami uniform, who watched Naruto come in the way that intelligent people watch things they haven't categorized yet. There were 3 other Shinigami in lesser capacity, assessors, he assumed, and Rukia, who was standing off to one side with the careful posture of someone who'd been told to stand there and not speak. He met her eyes when he came in and nodded once. She looked like she'd slept badly, and her return nod was slightly harried. Uzumaki Naruto, said one of the assessors, reading from a document. Self-identified. Arrived in District 64 of Rukongai approximately 5 days ago. Reportedly eliminated a mid-class hollow without a Zanpakuto or formal Kido training, using an unclassified technique producing Ryatsu output in excess of what Lieutenant Kuchiki was able to gauge. I wasn't carrying a measurement tool at the time, Rukia said, which she'd apparently already had to explain, from her tone. Regardless. The assessor turned to Naruto. We'll begin with a standard Ryatsu measurement. If you'll place your hands on the instrument. The instrument was waist-high and had a flat surface with what looked like a receiving crystal in the center, surrounded by small measuring markers. He'd seen chakra measuring devices back in the world of the living. This looked similar in principle. He placed his hands on it. The silence that followed was approximately 3 seconds long, which was long enough for everyone in the room to have a different reaction to what they were seeing. The assessors made sounds of increasing alarm. Rukia inhaled sharply. The captain with the long hair tilted her head slightly, very slightly, like a person who just heard a note of music they weren't expecting. The crystal shattered. Not cracked. Shattered, into about 15 pieces, which scattered across the surface of the measuring device and fell to the floor with small musical sounds in the sudden quiet. One of the assessors stood up so quickly his chair scraped back. That's not possible. Naruto offered. The instrument measures up to a captain-class Ryatsu threshold, the assessor said, staring at the pieces. It shouldn't be possible for it to break. It's calibrated to handle. Do you have a larger one? The assessor turned to look at him. What? A larger instrument. A stronger one. Naruto kept his voice mild and curious, not challenging. If the limit on this one is captain class, presumably there are instruments rated higher. This is a standard assessment instrument. It measures everyone in Soul Society, then everyone in Soul Society has been conveniently below the limit, Naruto said. Which is probably reassuring, from an administrative standpoint. Another silence. The captain with the long hair made a sound. It was not a laugh, exactly, but it had the shape of one. Unohana Taishu, one of the assessors said, turning to her with the desperate energy of someone appealing to the highest authority in the room. Unohana Retsu stepped forward from where she'd been standing against the wall. Up close she was smaller than her presence suggested, with a face arranged in a kind of permanent serene pleasantness that Naruto clocked immediately as someone who had no need to look threatening because what she was underneath was beyond threat. He'd seen that look before, in Tsunade, in the Kage who'd survived long enough to stop performing authority and simply have it. He straightened slightly. Not from deference. From respect, which was a different thing. She looked at him steadily for a long moment. Not at the broken instrument. Not at the space where the hollow had been described. At him, specifically, the way a very skilled medic looks at a patient, trying to see what's happening underneath. What was the technique you used against the hollow? She asked. Her voice was quiet and had no edges. Improvised, he said honestly. I used to form a spinning sphere of chakra, energy, Ryatsu here, concentrated between my palms. It was similar to that. But different material. More of, what's in me? And what is in you? He considered that. It was a genuinely good question, and she'd asked it without the alarm or the suspicion that the assessors were radiating. She'd asked it the way a person asks something they actually want to know. Something old, he said finally. Something that's been with me since before I can remember. A partner. He paused. It's not malevolent. That's probably relevant. Unohana held his gaze. It isn't hollow Ryatsu. No. It isn't the standard signature of a Shinigami either. No. But it's extraordinarily dense. She tilted her head fractionally. Layered. I can feel at least 2 distinct signatures within your Ryatsu, and they're in alignment. Not fighting each other. That's. She paused, which was the first sign of anything other than perfect composure she'd shown. Unusual. We've had a long time to work it out, Naruto said. She looked at him for another long moment. Then she turned to the assessors with the unhurried authority of someone who had never needed to raise her voice. I'll be recommending enrollment in the Shinigami Academy, accelerated track, with direct captain-level monitoring. Please note in the report that standard assessment instruments were insufficient and that the measurement will be classified as above operational scale for purposes of documentation. She paused. Also, please order new instruments. Yes, Unohana Taishu, the assessors said, very nearly simultaneously. Naruto met Rukia's eyes across the room. She was looking at him with an expression caught between exasperation and something warmer, the particular expression of someone who's been vindicated about something they weren't quite sure they were right about. He gave her a small grin. She looked away immediately, but the corner of her mouth twitched. The first night in Siriidii, they gave him a room in one of the administrative buildings, small, clean, adequate. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while, not sleeping, not particularly troubled, just thinking. He thought about Hinata. He thought about his kids. He hoped, not with grief, because grief wasn't right for this, he'd had a whole life, he hoped they were okay. He hoped the grief he'd left behind wasn't too heavy, that it had been what he always tried to make hard things, something that felt like it meant something. He thought about Konoha. The village in spring, the way the sakura came down in the market district, the smell of Ichiraku ramen when you were cold and tired and home. He breathed through it. Not suppressing it, he'd never been good at suppressing anything, just letting it settle into the right place, the place where things you've lost go when you've actually made peace with losing them. Then he put his hand flat on his chest and let Kurama's warmth rise up through him, steady and old and present. Different world, he thought at the fox. The response was layered, as always, but one part of it was clear, same us. He lay back and stared at the ceiling. Same us, he agreed. He fell asleep faster than he expected to, and he dreamed of two blades, one burning orange in his right hand, one glowing deep blue gold in his left, and a voice, vast and low and double-toned, saying words he couldn't quite catch, in a language that felt like the first language, the one underneath all the others. He woke up with the feeling of the blade still in his hands, warm and perfect as heartbeats. He looked at his empty palms. Soon, he told them. Somewhere in Siriidii, the first birds of morning were starting. He got up, stretched the particular stretch of someone with very old muscle memory in a very new body, and went to find something to eat, because whatever else was true about being dead, he was absolutely still hungry, and the afterlife owed him at least a decent bowl of ramen. It didn't have ramen. It had something close. He ate 2 portions and started making friends with the kitchen staff, because that was just what you did, and because the woman who ran the kitchen had a laugh that reminded him of Sakura and he wanted to hear it again. By mid-morning, the entire kitchen staff knew his name. By afternoon, half the administrative building did. By evening, a messenger arrived at his door with a formal notice of enrollment in the Shinigami Academy, beginning the following week, and a note in neat, precise handwriting at the bottom that said, "Be punctual. Uno hana retsu." He read it twice, grinning. Then he tucked it into his uniform and went back to the kitchen for a third portion of almost ramen, because tomorrow, apparently, was going to be interesting. It usually was. Chapter 2, Faster Than the Academy Thinks. The Shinigami Academy was 6 years long. That was the standard track, 6 years of Zenjutsu, Hakuda, Hoho, Kido, and enough theory and history to make a person feel like they'd survived a second death by the time they graduated. There was an accelerated track for exceptional students, which got it down to 3 years. There was, technically, a special assessment track for individuals whose abilities placed them in a category the standard curriculum couldn't meaningfully address, but that track hadn't been used in living memory, and the academy staff who greeted Naruto on his first morning seemed to be under the impression that he was on the accelerated track and would have the good grace to take at least a year. Naruto walked into the academy on a clear morning with his hands in his pockets and his hair doing what his hair always did, which was whatever it wanted, and looked around at the training grounds, the classroom buildings, the younger students moving in organized clusters between sessions, and felt, very briefly, like he was 12 years old and walking into the academy at Konoha. The nostalgia hit harder than he expected. He stood still in the middle of the main courtyard and let it move through him, the particular, bittersweet weight of a thing that was both deeply familiar and completely gone. Then he breathed out and kept walking, because standing still in the middle of a courtyard was how you got people coming over to ask if you were lost, and he'd already had 3 of those this morning. His assigned guide was a third-year student named Shiba Ganju, no relation that he'd found yet, though the name made him do a double take, who was enthusiastic in the relentless way of someone who'd been told this assignment was an honor and was determined to believe it. Ganju was broad-shouldered and good-natured and talked constantly, which Naruto appreciated in the same way he appreciated rain. It was just what the environment did, and you moved through it. So you're on the special track, yeah. I heard the assessment instrument broke when they tested you, like, actually broke, is that true? They never used the special track. The last person on the special track was, like, 200 years ago, and that's not even confirmed, it's more like Academy legend. You're not going to be like that, right? That guy disappeared. Well, they say he disappeared. Personally I think, what's first? Naruto asked. Ganju blinked. What? First session. What is it? Oh. Zanjutsu. Sword fundamentals. But since you're on the special track they're going to do an evaluation first, so you'll be going to the assessment hall rather than the, hey, wait, that's the wrong direction. Naruto had already turned toward the training grounds. The Zanjutsu evaluation was conducted by an instructor named Otaribashi, who had the focused, compact energy of someone who'd spent a long time mastering a thing and was mildly impatient with people who hadn't. He was not a captain, but he carried himself with the particular assurance of someone who'd once been close to it and had chosen not to be, which was its own kind of confidence. He handed Naruto a standard training Zanpakuto, wooden, practice weight, blunted, and told him to show him his stance. Naruto took the sword, bounced it once in his right hand to feel the weight, and stood with his feet shoulder-width apart in something that was recognizably a combat stance but wasn't quite any of the standard Zanjutsu forms, because it was built from 40 years of mixed combat experience filtered through a body that moved instinctively rather than academically. Otaribashi studied it. That's not standard. No. Where did you train? Complicated answer. Otaribashi made a sound that was either skepticism or consideration, picked up his own training sword, and came at Naruto without preamble or announcement. Naruto slipped the first strike inside, redirected the second with a touch, and had the tip of his training blade at Otaribashi's throat in the space of about 2 seconds. The instructor stepped back, lowered his sword, and looked at Naruto with an expression that had reorganized itself somewhere between impressed and professionally offended. Again, he said. They went again. This time Otaribashi came faster and with more commitment, using proper Zanjutsu footwork and a style that was elegant and practiced. Naruto felt the style more than he fought against it. He'd always learned best by feeling how a thing moved, and adapted, not imitating but absorbing, so that by the third exchange he was moving in a way that incorporated Otaribashi's own footwork reflected back through Naruto's instincts. The instructor got him on the fourth exchange. A subtle rotation of the wrist that turned a parry into a bind, and Naruto's training sword twisted out of his grip and clattered to the floor. Naruto grinned. Nice. You compensate for gaps in technical training with pure instinct and adaptability, Otaribashi said, with the tone of someone conducting a very professional analysis of how he'd just struggled to disarm a student. Your fundamentals are unorthodox but functional. Your reaction speed is. He paused. Anomalous. Yeah, I've gotten that a lot. Pick up your sword. They went for another hour. The Kido evaluation was a different kind of interesting. Naruto had never done anything that resembled formal spell work, so he went into the Kido classroom with genuine curiosity, which his instructor, a precise woman named Instructor Yadamaru, initially read as overconfidence and prepared to correct. She asked him to attempt a basic Heido, Sho, the most fundamental, just a burst of directed force. He considered the mechanics as she explained them, the Ryatsu output, the incantation, the directional intent. He tried it the way she described. The result was what she described, which was a small, clean burst of force that knocked the target dummy back 3 feet and was entirely appropriate for a student's first attempt. She nodded. Good. For a first, can I try it without the incantation? She blinked. The incantation shapes the technique. Without it the output becomes unstable, particularly for beginners. I know, I just want to see what happens. She gave him the particular look that experienced teachers give students who are about to demonstrate either exceptional promise or exceptional hubris. If you're certain. He focused on the same directional intent, stripped the incantation structure away, and pushed. The target dummy hit the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. Instructor Yadamaru looked at the cracked wall. Looked at Naruto. That was, more than show, he acknowledged. Considerably. She walked to the wall and pressed her fingers to the crack. Turned back. When you stripped the incantation, what did you put in its place? He thought about it. Intent. I knew what I wanted to happen and I just made my Ryatsu want it too. She was quiet for a moment. That's a description of how a captain fires Kido without incantation. Is it? He was genuinely surprised. Is that unusual at this level? Yes, she said, with the flat certainty of someone describing gravity. Sit down. We're going to go through every Heido through 30, without incantation, and I am going to take very detailed notes. He sat down. By the time they were done, 3 of the test dummies were destroyed, 1 wall had a new architectural feature, and Instructor Yadamaru had filled an entire notebook. She also sent an urgent message to Unohana Taishu that Naruto gathered from her expression she'd been considering sending since the second test. He didn't ask about its contents. He figured he'd find out. Ho-Ho was where it got complicated. Not complicated in the sense of difficult. Flash Step, Shuanpa, was conceptually similar enough to chakra-enhanced speed movement that he picked it up almost immediately, faster than anyone expected, within the first practice session at a level that made the Ho-Ho instructor go very quiet for a long moment. Complicated in the sense that when he demonstrated Shuanpa at full capability, not trying to show off, just defaulting to his natural speed once the mechanism was clear, he crossed the entire length of the training ground in a single step and appeared behind the instructor without the instructor perceiving the movement at all. The instructor turned around very slowly. Do that again, she said. It's just speed, Naruto said. I used to move faster than this. You used to, she stopped. Reorganized. Do that again, please. He did it again. She watched with every focusing technique a Ho-Ho instructor had available to them, and she still couldn't catch the middle of his movement. Just, standing in one place, then in another. Your Shuanpa, she said carefully, is already at a level I am not qualified to assess. Sorry. Don't apologize. Just, she ran a hand through her hair. Yadamaru already sent a message to Unohana Taishu. I'm going to send another one. Sure, Naruto said agreeably. Should I keep practicing or, please stop moving, she said. For a moment. Just, stop. He stopped. She took a breath. He waited. 3 weeks in, the academy had developed a complicated relationship with him. The students, for the most part, loved him, or at least were fascinated by him, which with the academy's age demographic was close to the same thing. He was approachable in the way that very powerful people sometimes are, when they don't have anything to prove, and he had the habit of stopping to actually help when he saw someone struggling, which in an environment as hierarchical as the academy was unusual enough to be memorable. He spent a lunch period helping a first-year named Momo Hinamori work through a Kido form she kept losing the shape of in the middle. He sparred with 3 second-years who'd heard about the Zanjutsu evaluation and wanted to see it themselves, and let them get enough hits in to be useful while making it clear that he wasn't trying, which somehow didn't come across as condescending the way it might have, because his feedback was specific and useful and he was genuinely enjoying himself. He was also, in a way he didn't talk about much, learning. The academy's curriculum was built for a world with different fundamentals than the one he'd come from, and even if the execution came easily to him, the understanding of what he was doing, why Ryatsu behaved the way it did in this world, how Zanpakuto worked, the structure of Bankai and Shirkai and the relationship between a Shinigami and their blade spirit, was genuinely new. He absorbed it the way he'd always absorbed things, through doing, through feeling, through the conversations he had with Kurama at night when the academy was quiet. The staff's relationship with him was more complicated. He'd broken 3 more training instruments, not through carelessness but through the simple fact that his Ryatsu was fundamentally incompatible with equipment designed to handle captain-level outputs. He'd been moved out of standard classroom settings for Kido and Zanjutsu because his practice sessions were interfering with the students around him, not from danger, just from the baseline presence of his Ryatsu, which the Academy's head of student welfare described, in a memo he wasn't supposed to see but Ganju told him about anyway, as, like having a small son in the classroom. He thought that was a bit much. Kurama thought it was accurate. He was also, by week 3, spectacularly bored in most of his sessions, and boredom made him creative, and creative Naruto was the kind of thing that generated paperwork. The incident with the training hall was nobody's fault, technically. He'd been practicing a technique of his own design, taking standard Kido structure and replacing the Ryatsu pathways with the channeling method he'd developed in the hollow fight, running Kurama's energy through it instead of pure Shinigami Ryatsu, and the result had been more energetic than planned. The training hall was still standing. The west wall had 3 new windows in it that weren't in the original design. Otoribashi came to find him after that one. Uno Hanataishu wants a report, he said, standing in front of the new windows with an expression of resigned professionalism. About the wall. About everything. He paused. Primarily about what you were attempting when you created the wall. Naruto explained the technique, as clearly as he could, which was reasonably clear, because he'd never had trouble explaining things, only time explaining them, and watched Otoribashi's expression do several things in sequence. Skepticism. Consideration. A kind of reluctant technical fascination. You're replacing the standard Ryatsu matrix in the Kido structure, the instructor said slowly. With something more compatible with how my Ryatsu actually works, yeah. And the difference in output is proportional to how much Kurama puts into it. Kurama. Naruto touched his chest. The partner I mentioned. Otoribashi was quiet for a moment. Then, I've been teaching Zanjutsu for 60 years, he said. In 60 years, I've never had a student I couldn't evaluate on a standard scale. He looked at Naruto. You're not on the standard scale. I know. That's not a compliment and a criticism. It's just a fact. I know that too. Otoribashi nodded once, and looked at the windows, and said, the wall was load-bearing. I know, Naruto said. I've already talked to the maintenance staff. I'm helping them fix it on Friday. I know a lot about construction, actually, I rebuilt my village 3 times. The instructor turned to look at him fully. You rebuilt, long story, Naruto said. Different world. The duel happened at the end of week 4, and it was not Naruto's idea. Instructor Jushiro, not the captain, a different one, the title being used informally, as the senior Zanjutsu instructor carried it by tradition rather than rank, was a man who had been doing things a certain way for 120 years and found innovation irritating in the specific way that very skilled traditionalists do, which is to say personally. He'd watched Naruto's evaluations with the expression of someone tasting something they'd already decided they didn't like. He'd also, in Naruto's 3rd week, started appearing at the end of Zanjutsu sessions to offer corrections that were less corrections and more challenges, little technical provocations, the kind that were deniable as instruction but functioned as tests of authority. Naruto had been letting them go, not from submission but from the assessment that the man wasn't worth the energy of an actual response. He had things to learn here and he was going to learn them regardless of who was being a pain about it. What changed was the student. Ganju, who'd graduated from enthusiastic guide to something approximating actual friendship, was in an intermediate Zanjutsu session that Naruto happened to be walking past when instructor Jushiro decided to use Ganju as a demonstration. Not of technique, of inadequacy. Making a student stand in front of the class and fail repeatedly, correcting with public sharpness instead of genuine instruction, using his humiliation as a teaching tool. Naruto stood outside the open training hall doorway and watched for about 30 seconds. Then he walked in. Sorry to interrupt, he said, which was a courtesy rather than an apology, delivered with the cheerful directness of someone who isn't sorry at all. Ganju, take a break. Ganju looked at him with an expression that was mostly relief and slightly alarmed. He moved to the side. Every student in the training hall was very still. Instructor Jushiro turned slowly. This is a closed session for enrolled students. I'm enrolled, Naruto said. Special track. I heard there's been talk of an assessment duel. He let the question sit there, light and inviting, as if he were suggesting something pleasant. There hadn't been talk of an assessment duel. But the instructor had been creating the conditions for one for 2 weeks, and they both knew it, and the careful neutrality of Naruto's face made it clear that he knew the instructor knew. Jushiro's jaw tightened. A duel with a student in an active session is irregular. I'm on an irregular track, Naruto said reasonably. I think we can make it work. A long moment. The students were absolutely not moving. Training swords, Jushiro said. Sure. One of the students handed Naruto a training Zanpakuto with the urgency of someone who'd just been given a role in something historic. He took it with a nod of thanks and turned to face the instructor. He didn't drop into a stance. He just stood there, sword at his side, relaxed. Jushiro came at him hard from the first exchange, not pulling punches, not performing for the students, actually trying, with 120 years of Zanjutsu technique behind every movement. It was good. It was genuinely good. The kind of swordsmanship that had its own gravity, its own beauty, technically complete in a way that Naruto could recognize and appreciate. He let it push him back for the first few exchanges, feeling it, absorbing it, the way he'd always fought, learning the rhythm before he changed it. Then he changed it. He didn't use anything fancy. He didn't need to. He just started fighting at his actual level, the reflexes of a shinobi who'd survived battles that reshaped landscapes, filtered through 40 more years of experience on top of that, translated into a swordsmanship style that was entirely his own and incorporated half a dozen schools of combat that hadn't existed in Soul Society. Jushiro's technique began to break against it like water against stone, not because the technique was bad, but because it had been built for opponents who fought in recognizable patterns. Naruto didn't have patterns. He had instincts, and instincts adapted. The duel lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Naruto had the instructor's training sword on the floor and his own tip pressed lightly to the man's throat with enough time left over to make clear the ending had been a choice about when, not if. The training hall was completely silent. Naruto stepped back, lowered the sword. He looked at Jushiro steadily, without triumph, without cruelty. Just direct. You're a good swordsman, he said, and meant it. Your students are lucky. He paused a beat. Ganju especially. Jushiro said nothing. His face was doing something complicated, and Naruto left it to do its thing, turning back toward the door. He was almost through it when the feeling hit him. 3 Ryatsu signatures, outside, high and unmistakable, the density of captain-class power, not threatening, but present, and clearly had been present for at least the last 2 minutes of the duel. He stopped in the doorway. Outside, in the open corridor that ran along the training hall, 3 captains were standing with the particular stillness of people who've been watching something they found interesting and are now making decisions about what to do with it. He recognized Unohana Retsu from the assessment. She was watching him with the same quiet, deep attention she'd given him from the start. Beside her was a captain with white hair and teal eyes who looked, and this was something Naruto clocked with immediate, delighted recognition, like a teenager who'd been put in charge of a professional operation and was furious that this was somehow his life. The third captain he hadn't seen before, a man with silver hair pushed back from a lean, angular face, one eye covered by his hat brim, who was reading something from a small book with the practiced air of someone who pretended not to be paying attention as a personality choice. Naruto stood in the doorway and looked at all 3 of them. The white-haired captain, who couldn't have been taller than Naruto's collarbone, met his eyes with an expression that was aggressively unimpressed and deeply interested simultaneously. You graduated from Shuunpa evaluation in a single session, he said, without preamble or introduction. You've destroyed 7 pieces of training equipment. You've made 3 instructors send emergency messages to the 4th Division. And you just defeated Senior Instructor Jushiro in an unsanctioned duel using a style nobody in this academy has classified. 4 pieces of equipment, Naruto said. The instruments were 2 of them. The captain stared at him. That's not the part one expected you to respond to. The rest of it was accurate. The silver-haired captain turned a page in his book without looking up. The corner of his mouth was doing something that wasn't quite a smile. Hitsugaya Toshiro, the white-haired one said, with the taut precision of someone who's had to announce himself many times and hasn't gotten used to it. Captain, 10th Division. Naruto looked at him, the ice-teal eyes, the compact authority, the youth worn like armor because it was the only option. He felt immediate, unreasonable fondness. Naruto, he said. How old are you? Hitsugaya's eyes went flat. I'm a captain. That wasn't the question. It was the answer. Unohana's voice was perfectly serene. Yukitake Taishu sends his regrets for not attending in person. He was unavailable this afternoon. The silver-haired captain finally looked up from his book. Kairaku Shunsui, he said, with the easy warmth of someone who decided a long time ago that being formally impressive was too much work. Captain, 8th Division. That was interesting in there. Jushiro's good, Naruto said. I wasn't joking about that. I know you weren't. Kairaku tilted his head. What was interesting was the way you fought. Most people at your supposed level fight with whatever they have. You fought with what he had, first, until you knew it. Then you used yours. Naruto shrugged. Old habit. How old? A beat. Older than this body. Kairaku's eyes did something subtle and sharp behind the easy exterior. He tucked the book away without ceremony. Unohana Taishu has recommended accelerating your track further. I concur. Hitsugaya Taishu. Hitsugaya was still looking at Naruto with the expression of someone who'd been handed something they didn't know how to file. You're not afraid of me, he said. It wasn't a complaint, exactly. More like an observation he was making about the weather. Should I be? Naruto asked, with genuine curiosity rather than challenge. Most people are. You seem like a reasonable person. Hitsugaya blinked. Opened his mouth. Closed it. Turned to Kairaku. I agree with the acceleration recommendation, he said, with the crispness of someone moving on deliberately. My recommendation would be to schedule Zanpakuto assessment at the earliest opportunity. Whatever is inside him is already active and I'd prefer to have a classification before it decides to demonstrate itself further. That's reasonable, Naruto said. All three captains looked at him. The Zanpakuto thing, he said. I've been feeling them since before I got here. 2 of them. He said it without making it dramatic, just stating a fact. I figured I'd wait for a proper setting. Another silence, different in texture from the previous ones. 2, Unohana said. 2, he confirmed. Kairaku laughed, a real one, warm and slightly helpless. Right, he said. Right, of course. 2. He turned to Hitsugaya. You'd better tell the captain commander. Hitsugaya looked like he'd rather do almost anything else. But he nodded, once, with the dutiful fatalism of someone who'd long since made peace with delivering unusual news to very old men in positions of ultimate authority. Tomorrow morning, Unohana said, to Naruto. The Zanpakuto assessment hall. I'll be there. Okay, Naruto said. Get some rest. I'll try. He paused. The kitchen usually has extra from dinner. Do you want me to bring? Good night, Naruto, Unohana said, with the serenity of someone closing a door on a topic with great and practiced gentleness. He went back to his room. He lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling and felt the 2 presences in his chest, warm and patient, like banked fires waiting for the air to reach them. Tomorrow, he told them. The right one, Kantan, pulsed with something hot and eager. The left one, Momori, pulsed with something steady and deep. He fell asleep smiling. The assessment hall was high-ceilinged and empty, cleared for the occasion, and in the morning light it felt genuinely significant in the way that spaces sometimes do when the people in them know something is about to happen that doesn't happen often. Unohana was there. Kairaku was there, with his book open but clearly not reading it. Hitsugaya stood at the back with his arms folded like a man prepared to be professionally skeptical until proven otherwise. Rukia was there too, which surprised Naruto. She was standing near the wall with her hands clasped in the careful posture of someone who'd been told to observe, but her eyes were alive with something that looked like anticipation. He met her eyes. She gave him a short nod. He grinned. "Whenever you're ready," Unohana said. He stood in the center of the hall, empty-handed, and closed his eyes. He'd been feeling them for weeks, the presences, the blades that existed inside him the way Kurama existed inside him, as something fundamental rather than something attached. He hadn't tried to call them deliberately because he'd wanted to understand the context first, understand what he was doing and why, understand the relationship between a Shinigami and their Zanpakuto before he reached for his. He understood it now. He breathed in. Felt the warmth of both presences rise to meet the breath. Felt the familiar double tone of Kurama, not one voice but two aspects of one enormous thing, the fire that destroys and the fire that warms, the same flame, aimed differently. He said their names, not the release command, just their names, quietly, an introduction rather than a summons. Kontun. Momori. They answered. The sound was like a note struck on an instrument nobody had heard before. Not an explosion. Not a dramatic arrival. Just presence, suddenly manifest, weight and warmth and an orange gold light that bloomed from both of his hands simultaneously and resolved into blades. Two Zanpakuto. The right one, Kontun, was a short, broad-curved blade, the color of banked embers, with a guard worked in the shape of a swirling flame. It sat in his right hand like it had always been there, which it had. The left one, Momori, was longer and sleeker, a deep blue-gold shimmer running through the steel, the guard shaped like interlocking crescents. It settled into his left hand with a weight that felt like being held rather than holding. He opened his eyes. The hall was quiet. Rukia was staring with her hand over her mouth. Kairaku had closed his book. Hitsugaya was very still in the back of the room, and his Ryatsu, which was always tightly controlled, had done something involuntary at the edges, a shimmer of ice blue that appeared and was immediately suppressed, but not before Naruto felt it. Unohana looked at the blades. At Naruto. At the blades again. Two Zanpakuto, she said quietly. Two, he confirmed. Both manifested simultaneously. They're part of the same source. He adjusted his grip on both, naturally, like a man settling into something deeply familiar. They were never separate. Kairaku stood up from where he'd been leaning against the wall and walked forward, hands in his sleeves, taking his time. He looked at the blades with the studied attention of someone who knew a great deal about Zanpakuto and was currently having that knowledge challenged in a specific and interesting way. Kontun and Momori, he said. Naruto looked at him. He hadn't said the names aloud. Kairaku smiled. A captain can hear the resonance. The identity in the Ryatsu signature. He tilted his head. Chaos and protection. Destruction and guardian. In the same pair of hands. Same source, Naruto said again. Different faces. Kairaku was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Unohana. The captain commander will want to see this. I know, she said. Today, he added. I know that too. Hitsugaya walked forward from the back of the hall. He stopped in front of Naruto and looked at the blades, not with the skepticism he'd come in with, but with something more honest, more focused, the expression of a genuinely intelligent person encountering something real. He looked up at Naruto's face. Can you use them? He asked. Not are they real or how is this possible, can you use them? It was, Naruto thought, the right question, and he liked Hitsugaya more for asking it. Yeah, he said. Both simultaneously. Yeah. Hitsugaya held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, crisply, the nod of a man filing something under established fact and moving on. "The Captain Commander," he said to Kairaku. "I'll send word," Kairaku agreed. Naruto looked down at the blades, warm in his hands, patient and present, emitting a soft steady heat that was not hollow, not darkness, not any kind of malevolence, just the oldest and most fundamental of energies, the will to burn, and the will to hold. From across the hall, quiet enough that only Naruto heard it, Rukia said, "I told them you were different." He looked over. She was looking at his blades with an expression that had dropped all the Shinigami professionalism and was just, genuine. Wide open. "I saw what you did to that hollow," she said. "I knew." "You didn't know," he said. "Not this." She met his eyes. "No," she agreed. "Not exactly this." A small pause. "But something. Something that doesn't happen every day." He thought about that for a moment, the girl who'd looked at him in District 64 and decided to write a report instead of looking away. Who'd been in that assessment room and was in this one, who kept showing up at the edges of things like she was keeping track. "Why do you keep showing up?" he asked, genuinely curious. She blinked. Looked like she was about to say something formal and stopped herself. "Because," she said finally, with the honesty of someone who decided to just say the thing, "I want to know how this story goes." He laughed, real, sudden, warm, and the sound rang off the high ceiling of the empty assessment hall, and both Zanpakuto pulsed in his hands like heartbeats. "Me too," he said. Chapter 3, The Fox Wears a Haori. The summons to the Captain Commander came and went in the way that formal summons involving very old men in positions of absolute authority typically did, with gravity, ceremony, and a distinct undercurrent of everyone in the room pretending the situation was more contained than it was. Yamamoto Genryusai Shigekuni was ancient in the way that certain mountains were ancient, not just old but geological, shaped by forces and timescales that made the present moment feel provisional. He sat behind his desk in the First Division's administrative hall and looked at Naruto with eyes that had seen the founding of Soul Society, the construction of every institution in this world, and several things that hadn't made it into the official record. Naruto stood in front of him with his hands loose at his sides and looked back. The silence lasted about 10 seconds, which for a room containing the Captain Commander of the Gotei 13 and a man who'd once stared down the embodiment of all killing intent in creation, was comfortable territory for both of them. "To Zanpakuto," Yamamoto said. "Yes. In 900 years of command, I have seen one other individual manifest dual Zanpakuto," the old man said. "He was a captain. He died in a way that I will not discuss, in a war you have no context for. The dual manifestation was considered an anomaly of extraordinary rarity." He paused. "You have been in Soul Society for approximately 5 weeks. 6, actually," Naruto said. "I arrived on a Thursday." Kairaku, standing off to one side, made a sound he converted into a cough. Yamamoto's expression didn't change. "Your Ryatsu," he said, "is unlike anything currently recorded in Soul Society's classification systems. It is not hollow. It is not Quincy. It is not standard Shinigami. It contains something else, something old, and large, and in what appears to be deliberate cooperation with your own spiritual pressure." He folded his hands on the desk. "What are you?" It was the same question Unohana had asked. He gave the same kind of answer. "A Shinigami," he said. "With a complicated history and a very old partner." "The partner. I've carried it since before I can remember. It was part of me when I was alive, and it was part of my soul when I died, and apparently that means it came along." He paused. "It's not a threat to Soul Society. I can tell you that with certainty. You seem very confident of that. I've had 70 years to know it." He met the old man's eyes steadily. "It protects. That's what it does, fundamentally. The destruction is a function of protection. It burns things that threaten the people it cares about. A beat. It cares about a lot of people. Another silence. Yamamoto looked at him with the comprehensive attention of someone who had spent 9 centuries developing the skill of reading people, filtering truth from performance. Naruto didn't perform. He never had. He'd found, a long time ago, that honesty delivered with absolute conviction was more disarming than any strategy. The academy staff, Yamamoto said, has submitted assessments indicating that your progress through curriculum has been effectively instantaneous in every category. He looked at a document on his desk. The Ho-Ho instructor describes your Shuinpa as beyond available assessment benchmarks. Your Kido output, incantationless, at week 3, matches or exceeds lieutenant class standard. Your Zenjutsu is classified as unorthodox but functionally superior to senior instructors. And you have now manifested 2 Zanpakuto. He set the document down. What would you require to attempt Shirkai? Naruto blinked. He hadn't expected that to be the next question. I've already heard them, he said. The room temperature changed slightly. Not literally, but the quality of attention in it did. You've achieved Shirkai communication, Unohana said, from her place near the wall. I know their names. I've spoken to them. He glanced at Kairaku. You heard the resonance yourself. Hearing the resonance and achieving Shirkai release are distinct, Hitsugaya started. Kantan, Naruto said. Burn. The right blade ignited. Not metaphorically, it literally ignited, or something close to it, the steel transfiguring into a state that was between solid and energy, orange-gold fire running the length of the blade without consuming it, the Ryatsu output spiking in the room like someone had opened a furnace door. The air pressure changed. 2 of the windows rattled in their frames. Mamori, he said. Shield. The left blade shifted, the shimmer deepening, the blue-gold spreading, the Ryatsu signature changing from the burning expansive pressure of Kantan to something denser and more encompassing, a warmth that moved outward rather than forward, that wrapped rather than cut. He stood in the captain commander's office holding both released blades, orange-gold fire on the right, deep blue-gold warmth on the left, and looked at Yamamoto. Yamamoto looked back. I see, the old man said. Sorry about the windows, Naruto said. They have been broken before. Yamamoto was quiet for a moment. Then, release them. Naruto let the Shirkai drop. Both blades returned to their sealed state, the Ryatsu pulling back into him like a tide, and the room settled. You will not complete the academy curriculum, Yamamoto said. It wasn't a question. Probably not usefully, no, Naruto agreed. The Gotei 13 has a process for captain appointment. It requires either the recommendation of 6 or more captains, or a demonstration of Bankai, or defeating a current captain in combat. He looked at Naruto with eyes that were ancient and calculating and not unkind. You are not ready to be a captain. You have been in Soul Society for 6 weeks. You have no understanding of the institutions you would be required to command. That's fair, Naruto said. However, Yamamoto's hands unfolded on the desk. You are also not a student, in any meaningful sense. You are something this institution has not seen before, and I have found, in 900 years, that when something unprecedented arrives, the appropriate response is not to force it into an existing category. He paused. You will be assigned as a special class, not student, not officer, not captain. You will train under rotating captain supervision. You will learn the institutions and their functions. You will be monitored. The weight in that word was significant. And we will revisit your status when circumstances make revisitation necessary. Naruto nodded. Okay. You accept these terms without negotiation. They're reasonable terms. He tilted his head. You're worried about a variable you can't control, so you're building a structure around it that gives you information while you figure out what it is. I'd do the same. Yamamoto looked at him for a long moment. You have led before, he said. Not a question. For a long time. Then you understand why I cannot simply give you authority in this institution. Completely, Naruto said. Authority you haven't earned is just noise. He paused. I'm good at earning things. Kairaku laughed, sudden and genuine, and didn't bother to disguise it this time. Yamamoto gave Kairaku a look that had been perfecting itself for several centuries. Kairaku subsided, with the ease of someone who'd been on the receiving end of that look so many times it had lost its capacity to intimidate. You're dismissed, Yamamoto said to Naruto. Naruto turned to go. He was nearly at the door when the old man spoke again. Uzumaki Naruto. He stopped. Whatever you carried in life, Yamamoto said, you are carrying it here. That is not always a blessing. Naruto considered that. He thought of Kurama, the weight of him, the history of him, the long complicated love of him. He thought of Konoha, of everything he built and protected and lost and rebuilt. He thought about the particular kind of person you became when you'd carried something enormous for long enough that you and the weight were no longer distinguishable. I know, he said. But I've never minded. He walked out. 6 weeks of the special classification passed in the particular way that time passes when you're constantly busy and genuinely interested in what you're doing, quickly, without quite enough sleep, and with the feeling that each day contained more than a standard day's worth of events. He rotated through captain's supervision as arranged. Unohana's days were his favorite. She taught with the same quiet depths that she carried everywhere, and she'd begun to treat him with a warmth that was different from her professional serenity, something more personal, as though she'd made a decision about him somewhere along the way that she hadn't announced. He learned more about Ryatsu in her company than anywhere else, its medical applications, its nature as a living force, the way it reflected and expressed the soul carrying it. Kairaku's days were the most enjoyable, largely because Kairaku's approach to instruction was indistinguishable from his approach to everything else, which was to create conditions in which interesting things happened and then pay close attention to the interesting things. He was the one who taught Naruto to control the expression of his Ryatsu, not to suppress it, which was both futile and counterproductive, but to aim it, the way you aimed a floodlight rather than a flashlight. The difference between presence that overwhelmed a room and presence that filled it exactly. Hitsugaya's days were the most entertaining, which Naruto kept to himself because Hitsugaya would have found it annoying. Your left-hand stance opens your right side, Hitsugaya said, on the third session, with the crisp certainty of a man who didn't expect his observations to be questioned. Only if someone gets inside my guard, Naruto said. And if they do? Then I let them, and they find out why I let them. Hitsugaya stared at him. That's not a defensive strategy. That's a trap. Yes. You're describing your defensive posture as a trap. Is that not a normal thing? It's not a teachable thing, Hitsugaya said, which was the closest he came to expressing that he found Naruto genuinely baffling. He turned to his own blade, Hyarinmaru, and ran through the beginning of a Shirkai release sequence with the fluid precision of someone for whom the motion was entirely natural. Ice crystals formed in the air around him. Naruto watched with genuine appreciation. It was beautiful. The way Hitsugaya moved with his Zanpakuto was the way the best fighters always moved, like there was no distinction between the weapon and the person, like the ice was an extension of thought rather than action. You love it, Naruto said. Hitsugaya looked over. What? Fighting. The blade. He nodded at Hyarinmaru. You love them. A silence. Hitsugaya looked like he was deciding whether to refute this on principle. Captain Hitsugaya, Nanao, the 8th Division Lieutenant, had told Naruto during a joint session, express his feelings primarily through doing things at them rather than about them. A captain's relationship with their Zanpakuto is fundamental, Hitsugaya said finally, which was a non-answer that contained an answer. Naruto rolled his shoulder and brought up both blades into a loose ready stance. Come at me, he said. Shirkai. Full. Hitsugaya went still. That's not on today's. Come on, Naruto said, with the particular warmth in his voice that was not quite a challenge and not quite a request but somehow more compelling than either. I want to feel how your Ryatsu moves. Can't learn that from watching. Another silence. Then Hitsugaya's Ryatsu rose, cold and clean and enormous for his apparent size, like opening a door onto an Arctic Ocean, and Hyarinmaru's release filled the training ground with ice and wind and the presence of something ancient and serpentine wheeling through the sky overhead. Naruto brought both blades up and met it, and for 40 minutes the training ground was a spectacle of ice and foxfire that nobody who witnessed it from outside quite had the right words to describe afterwards. He learned a lot, those 6 weeks. The alert came in the middle of the night. He was asleep, actually asleep, not just lying there thinking, which was a win, when the Ryatsu hit him. Not one hollow. Not even a small cluster. Something massive, building slowly in a district of Rukongai far enough out that the normal response time would take 20 minutes by Shunpa for a lieutenant, 15 for a captain. He was out of his bed and moving in the same second he woke up. He'd worked out the geography over 6 weeks, the way he'd always worked out geography, by walking it, by feeling it, by developing a spatial sense of where things were relative to each other. He knew which direction Rukongai District 71 was. He moved. The Shunpa covered the distance in under 4 minutes. What he found was worse than the Ryatsu had suggested. A Minos Grande, one of the enormous ones, Jillian class, massive and dark and slow but terrible in the particular way that very large, very hungry things were terrible, had nested against the outer edge of Rukongai. Nested was the right word, because it wasn't actively moving, wasn't actively hunting. It was feeding, which was more dangerous, pulling the spiritual pressure of the souls around it in a slow, enormous draw, like a drain in still water. The souls in a rough half-mile radius were on the ground, not dead but stunned, their Ryatsu slowly being drawn out of them. There were 2 Shinigami already there, lieutenants, from the look of their badges, both of them engaged with the Minos but not making progress. You didn't defeat a Minos Grande with ordinary Shirkai, not quickly. You needed Bankai, or Kido strong enough to punch through the outer layer and hit the mask underneath, or something else entirely. He took in the scene in about 3 seconds. The Minos was 30 feet tall and getting taller as it fed, drawing in the ambient spiritual pressure and converting it. Its mask was already cracked from the lieutenant's efforts, 2 long diagonal fractures across the lower half, but not enough. The souls on the ground were fading slowly. The edge of the feeding radius was maybe 600 meters from the nearest heavily populated cluster of Rukongai structures. He did the math fast. If the Minos completed its feeding cycle here, it would move. Fed, it would be faster and stronger. The next district was District 72, which had a higher population density. He stepped forward and let his Ryatsu go. Not all of it. Not Bankai. He wasn't ready to release Bankai, not because he couldn't but because in an inhabited area the collateral was not acceptable, and he'd been very careful about that distinction since arriving here. But he dropped the careful management he kept on his baseline output, let it rise to its natural level, and in about 2 seconds the air in a quarter-mile radius felt like standing next to a bonfire. Both lieutenants spun around. One of them he recognized, a young man named Ikaku Madarame who had the particular energy of someone who existed specifically to fight things and found non-combat situations a mild imposition. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye and his Zanpakuto was out, and he looked at Naruto with an expression that went through surprise, recognition, and something like relief in quick succession. "You," he said. "The special track guy." "What are you?" "Back up," Naruto said. "Both of you. Get the souls who are still mobile moving away from the radius." Ikaku opened his mouth. "Now," Naruto said, and his voice was the voice of someone who'd given orders in active combat for 40 years and had never once needed to raise it to be obeyed. Not commanding. Just certain. Ikaku looked at him for one more second, then sheathed his blade and turned to grab the nearest incapacitated soul. The other lieutenant was already moving. Naruto turned back to the Minos. He brought both blades up, sealed state, still, and felt the familiar conversation with Kurama's presence, the negotiation between what he needed and what was safe, the balance that had taken them decades to perfect. Not full output, he told the presence. Precision. Surgery. The response was understanding, and something that felt like wry patience, the tone of something very powerful that had learned, over many years, to wait for the right moment. He released Shirkai on both blades simultaneously. Kantan ignited. Mamori deepened. The combined Ryatsu output was significant enough that the air distorted around him, a visible shimmer, and the Minos, which had been ignoring him the way something 30 feet tall ignores most things, turned its mask toward him. He felt the moment it recognized what was in him. The Minos Grande pulled back from its feeding. Not fleeing, it couldn't flee, it was too large and too committed to the feeding cycle, but its attention redirected, drawn by something in Naruto's spiritual pressure that was apparently not something hollows encountered often. A power signature older and larger than itself, registered through the hollow's basic predatory instincts as something that should be feared. Yeah, Naruto said quietly, to the Minos and to himself. I know. He moved. He covered the distance to the Minos in a single Shunpa step, appeared directly in front of its mask, and drove Kantan's blade into the existing crack in the center. The technique he used was not Aikido. It was not a standard Zanpakuto technique. It was something he'd been developing over 6 weeks of quiet practice in the training halls, taking the Rasengan construct he'd used on the first hollow and refining it, taking Kurama's fire and running it through Kantan's already ignited blade to create a directed burst of pure offensive Ryatsu that traveled through the crack in the mask and detonated inside. There was a sound. The word sound didn't really cover it. It was more like a moment of pressure, everywhere at once, that lasted a fraction of a second and then resolved into silence. The Minos came apart from the inside out. Not violently, no explosion, no debris. Mas Grande dissolution was always more like mist than destruction, the spiritual matter dispersing back into the ambient pressure of the world, the vast dark shape simply ceasing to cohere and drifting apart in slow black curls. Within 10 seconds it was gone, leaving only the crack it had made in the air by its presence, and the souls on the ground who were already beginning to stir as the feeding pressure released. Naruto stood in the space where a 30-foot hollow had been 30 seconds ago, both blades still in Shirkai, and breathed. Ikaku was staring at him from 20 meters away. What? Ikaku said. It's gone, Naruto said. How are the souls? They're waking up, but, Ikaku came forward, eyes fixed on the empty air where the Minos had been. You killed a Jillian. By yourself. He counted something in his head. 30 seconds. 40, roughly, Naruto said. Ikaku stopped. Then his expression changed, going from stunned to something almost gleeful. What are you? Nobody told me you could do that. I'm on the special track, Naruto said. What does that even? Ikaku pushed the blood out of his eye and looked at Naruto with the delighted attention of someone who just found something they wanted to fight. Can I fight you? I don't think now is the time, not now, later. When you're free. Spar. Real one. He pointed. You're something, I can tell. I want to know what. Naruto sealed his blades, both going quiet in his hands, the fire and the warmth settling back into the steel, and considered Ikaku with a grin. The man was bleeding from his face and his first response to witnessing something extraordinary was to want to measure himself against it. Naruto knew that energy intimately. Yeah, all right, he said. Not today. Soon. Sure. The other lieutenant had come back, and Naruto looked at her. She was composed, professional, and looking at him with the expression that was becoming familiar, the recalibration face, as he'd come to think of it. The look people got when they needed to update a fundamental assumption. I need to file a report, she said. I know, he said. The captain commander, I know, he said again, gently. I'll be there when he calls. The captain commander did not call. Instead, there was a captain's meeting. Naruto learned about it from Rukia, who showed up at his door the following morning with the expression of someone who'd been up since early and had feelings about it. She'd filled out from the girl he'd first met in District 64, not in appearance, she looked the same, but in presence, in the way she carried herself, something more settled and certain in her bearing. "The captains are meeting about you," she said, by way of good morning. He'd been making tea. He poured her a cup without asking. She took it automatically. "About last night," he said. "About everything. The academy results, the Zanpakuto assessment, and now last night." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "You should know, there are different positions." She said it carefully, like she was walking around something. "Some captains believe you should be integrated formally. Others believe you should be," she stopped. "Controlled," he said. She met his eyes. "Some people are afraid of things they can't categorize." "I know." He sat down across from her. "They're not wrong to be cautious. A person shows up out of nowhere with a Ryatsu signature nobody's seen, kills a Jillian alone, and carries dual Zanpakuto. If someone like that showed up in my village, I'd want answers too." Rukia watched him. "You're very calm about this." "I spent my whole life being the thing people didn't know how to categorize," he said. "You stopped taking it personally after a while." She was quiet for a moment. The morning light came through the window at the angle that made everything look slightly warmer than it was. "What was your life like?" she asked. "Before?" "You remember it, I can tell. The way you talk about things, the way you know things that someone from Rukongai shouldn't know." He considered. He could give her the short version, he always had a short version. But Rukia had been showing up consistently since the beginning, not from assignment but from something genuine, and she'd earned more than the short version. "I was a shinobi," he said. "A warrior from a different world. Different kind of energy, chakra, not Ryatsu. Different kind of beings, we didn't have hollows, but we had things just as bad." He paused. "I became my village's leader eventually. Spent the last 20 years of my life running a hidden village and trying to make it into something worth protecting." She was listening with complete attention. "I wasn't good at being ordinary," he said. "I was terrible at it, actually. But I was very good at protecting people, and I was very good at making friends, and those two things turned out to be enough." "And the partner," Rukia said. "Kurama." He touched his chest, automatic. "He's the reason I survived most of my life. And the reason I'm what I am here." He smiled. "We started as enemies. Ended up something closer than family." He paused. "It's a long story." "I want to hear it," she said. Then, immediately, "Not today. You probably have things, I'll tell you sometime," he said. "When there's enough time to do it right." She nodded and looked down at her tea. Then, not looking up, "The captain meeting. Whatever they decide, I want you to know I've already submitted my assessment, and it says you should be trusted." Something warm moved through him, simple and genuine. "Thank you, Rukia." She looked up, and her expression was the one she made when she'd said something she hadn't entirely planned to say and was now committing to it anyway. "Don't make me regret it," she said, which landed like a joke but wasn't quite one. "Not planning on it," he said. The captain meeting was, by all accounts he could piece together from the aftermath, loud. He wasn't there for it. He spent the morning in the 4th Division's training area, working on a keto sequence Unohana had assigned him that focused on targeted healing application, something he'd been slow on, not because it didn't come naturally but because the applications required a precision that even his instincts had to work to achieve. He practiced it for 3 hours and improved it 4%, which felt inadequate, and would have to do. He was sitting in the training area, both blades unsealed and resting across his knees, talking to Kurama in the internal way they communicated, when Kairaku found him. The 8th Division captain walked across the empty training ground with his hands in his sleeves and his captain's Haori doing something picturesque in the morning breeze, and sat down on the ground next to Naruto with the complete ease of someone for whom dignity had been optional for a very long time. "The meeting was interesting," Kairaku said. "I gathered," Naruto said. 7 for formal integration, 3 against, 2 abstaining. He tilted his head back to look at the sky. The 3 against aren't wrong, technically. There's no precedent for integrating someone with your classification into the formal structure without the standard vetting process. But you killed a Jillian alone, without Bankai, in under a minute, and then immediately asked about the civilians. Kairaku turned his head to look at Naruto sidelong. It's the immediately part that mattered, in the room. Anyone can be powerful. What you do with it, immediately, instinctively, when there's no audience and no structure telling you what to prioritize, that's character. Naruto looked at him. You argued for integration. I argued that leaving someone with your capabilities in an undefined status was more dangerous than formalizing it. For Soul Society, not for you. He smiled, easy and genuine. You'd be fine regardless. I just think you'd be more useful with a division behind you. Division, Naruto said. Squad 10, Kairaku said. Currently without a permanent captain. Interim leadership. It has a good lieutenant, Matsumoto Ranjaku, formidable in ways that don't show up on assessment forms, and it's functional but directionless. He paused. Hitsugaya is going to hate this suggestion when it's officially made, for the record, because he's been mentoring the interim and will consider it an implied criticism. It isn't one. But try telling Hitsugaya that. The captaincy, Naruto said. You don't achieve it by the standard methods, Kairaku said. You have Shirkai but not demonstrated Bankai. But the captain commander has authority to appoint by special designation, which he's used exactly 3 times in 900 years. He looked at the sky again. He's considering using it a 4th time. Naruto was quiet for a moment. He looked down at the 2 blades across his knees, Kantan and Momori, warm and steady, watching the conversation with the patient attention of things that had opinions but expressed them privately. I don't want to lead something I don't understand, he said. That's why it would be provisional, Kairaku said. Monitored. Which you already are. But with actual authority, and actual responsibility, and a building full of Shinigami who you'd either terrify or inspire. He paused. Probably both. Probably, Naruto agreed. The decision is Yamamoto's. But the captains who voted yes, Unohana, Yukitake, myself, and several others, we wanted you to know the shape of it before it came down formally. He stood up, unhurried. Think about what you want from this world. He left Naruto sitting in the training ground with 2 blades across his knees and a sky full of morning light above him. Naruto thought about what Kairaku had said. Then he thought about District 64, and the woman with the laundry, and the small girl who'd been crying because she didn't know where she was. He thought about the Minos feeding on souls who had no way to fight back. He thought about the lieutenants who'd been struggling against it before he arrived. He picked up Kantan in his right hand and felt the familiar heat. What do you think? He asked it. The response from both blades was simultaneous and wordless, but it had the shape of, you already know. He did. The formal notification arrived that afternoon, delivered by a very composed messenger who had clearly been briefed to remain composed regardless of what happened. Naruto read it standing in the corridor outside his room. Captain Commander's seal. Formal language. Special designation appointment. Captain, 10th Division. He read it twice. Then he looked up and found Hitsugaya standing at the end of the corridor, arms folded, jaw set in the particular way it's set when he was processing something difficult with his feelings filed under not discussing it. Naruto walked to him. Stopped. Hitsugaya looked at him for a long moment. The interim captain is competent, he said. I know, Naruto said. Kairaku told me you'd feel that way. He said it's not a criticism of the interim or your mentorship. I know what it is and isn't, Hitsugaya said, which was the tightest way of saying I know but I'm still annoyed about it. You've been in Soul Society for 3 months. Yes. You don't know how divisions work. You don't know the administrative structure, the officer hierarchy, the patrol schedules, the I know how to lead people, Naruto said quietly. I've led a hidden village of thousands in active wartime for 20 years. I know what I don't know, and I'm very good at surrounding myself with people who can fill those gaps. He paused. Matsumoto knows the 10th division. I'll listen to her. Hitsugaya's expression shifted. Something in it reorganized, reluctantly, into the shape of acknowledgement. She'll like you, he said, finally, which coming from him was extremely close to I think this might work. She likes everyone. She'll like you too much and it will be a problem. I can handle that. You can handle most things, apparently. He said it flatly, without the edge that it would have had 3 months ago. Don't let it go to your head. Naruto grinned. I've been called arrogant by people twice your size and 3 times your age. You're doing it right now, Hitsugaya said. Little bit, Naruto agreed. Hitsugaya looked at him for another moment. Then, with the crisp decisiveness of someone executing a decision they've already made, the captain's meeting is tomorrow morning. Formal introduction. He turned. Wear the Haori properly. Unohana will notice if you don't. He walked away. Naruto watched him go. The Haori was hanging in his room. He'd been given it that afternoon, white, with the 10th Division's insignia, clean and formal and carrying in its fabric the particular gravity of institutional authority. He went back to his room and looked at it for a while. It wasn't the Hokage's Haori, that one had been fire-red and heavy with symbol and meaning accumulated over generations. This one was white, and new to him, and the meaning he gave it would be his own making. He picked it up. Put it on. Looked down at himself. He thought, old man would have laughed. Then he thought, he'd also have been proud. Both of those things were true, and they could exist together, which was something it had taken him most of his first life to understand. He sat down on his bed and reached out to Kurama, and felt the familiar warmth rise to meet him. Captain, he thought, letting the word settle. Kurama's response was layered, amusement, approval, the faint suggestion of something that felt like, finally something worth doing. Yeah, Naruto said. He looked at the 2 sealed blades leaning against the wall, catching the evening light. Outside his window, Soul Society went on, the birds, the bells, the movement of Shinigami between divisions, the vast and ancient machinery of an institution that had been running for 900 years and would be running for 900 more. He was part of it now. He was going to change it. Not because he'd decided to, he'd never been someone who came in planning to change things. Just because that's what happened when someone like him walked through a door and started caring about what was on the other side. He'd learned that a long time ago. Tomorrow, the captains. Tonight, sleep, and in his dreams, maybe, the voice that was double-toned and ancient, telling him things in the language underneath all languages. He was already learning to speak it back. Chapter 4, Things Aizen didn't plan for. The captain's meeting room was circular, which Naruto appreciated. No head of the table. No positional hierarchy encoded into the furniture. Just a ring of captains standing in their positions with the captain commander at one end, which was technically still a hierarchy but at least had the architectural decency not to admit it. He walked in wearing the white Haori and felt every set of eyes in the room make contact with him in the first 2 seconds. He'd walked into rooms like this before, rooms full of powerful people who'd already formed opinions about him before he opened his mouth, and the feeling was familiar enough to be almost comfortable. He took his position. 10th Division, between 11th and 9th. Yamamoto introduced him without ceremony or editorial. Uzumaki Naruto, Special Designation Captain, 10th Division. The formality of it was brief and final, the way the old man did everything, no excess, no performance, just the weight of the words themselves. Naruto looked around the ring. He'd met Unohana and Kairaku and Hitsugaya. He'd heard descriptions of the others, but descriptions and presence were different things, and he paid attention to presence. Zaraki Kenpachi, captain of the 11th, was approximately what happened if you took the concept of fighting and gave it a human shape and a very bad attitude about hair accessories, enormous, scarred, wearing his Ryatsu like someone who'd never learned to contain it and considered that a personal achievement. He was looking at Naruto with the direct, assessing attention of a man who evaluated everything in terms of whether or not it was worth fighting. Naruto met his eyes and nodded. Zaraki's mouth curved slightly, which on his face was the equivalent of an enthusiastic greeting. Yukitake Jushiro, captain of the 13th, had the gentle warmth of someone who'd been kind for so long it had become structural. He smiled at Naruto with genuine welcome, the kind that didn't need anything in return. Naruto liked him immediately. Soifan, captain of the 2nd, was compact and precise and radiating the particular energy of someone who had very strong opinions about correct methodology and was already skeptical that Naruto had any. She hadn't looked away from him since he'd walked in. Kamamura Sajin, captain of the 7th, was, unexpectedly, briefly, a very large anthropomorphic fox, which Naruto processed with the equanimity of a man who'd spent years working with a nine-tailed demon and found the universe's visual language somewhat predictable in its choices. He made a mental note to introduce himself properly after the meeting. And then there was Aizen Sosuke, captain of the 5th division. Standing in his position in the ring with the white haori and the brown hair and the glasses and the expression of someone who was listening to the meeting with polite, attentive interest. Naruto looked at him for exactly as long as he looked at everyone else. Then he looked away. But something had registered. It wasn't Ryatsu. Aizen's Ryatsu was perfectly ordinary captain class, controlled and smooth and entirely unremarkable, which was itself remarkable in a room where every other person's spiritual pressure had texture and personality. It was something else, something underneath the Ryatsu, in the quality of the attention Aizen was paying. The way his interest was shaped. Naruto had met people like that before. People whose interest had the structure of calculation. People who were always in the room behind their eyes, running numbers, processing, filing. He'd fought one of them. The memory was old but specific. He didn't change his expression. He finished looking around the ring and looked at Yamamoto. The captain commander acknowledged him with a brief nod that meant take your place, we continue. He took his place. The meeting moved on to operational matters. After the meeting, in the corridor outside the 1st Division's meeting hall, Aizen found him. It was done well. Not conspicuous, just a natural drift in Naruto's direction as the captains dispersed, the casual coincidence of two people moving the same way. If Naruto hadn't been paying attention he'd have accepted it as exactly that. Uzumaki Taishu, Aizen said, with a warmth in his voice that was technically impeccable. I wanted to welcome you personally. The 5th Division's administrative offices are near the 10th, if you need guidance navigating the institutional structure, I'd be happy to help. Naruto stopped and looked at him. Up close, Aizen was pleasant-faced and attentive, his glasses catching the light in a way that made his eyes slightly harder to read, which Naruto suspected was not accidental. His Ryatsu was, as before, perfectly smooth. Friendly. Open. It was the openness that was wrong. Not fake, exactly, too good for fake. Constructed. The openness of someone who decided openness was the optimal signal to project and had perfected the projection. Thanks, Naruto said. He kept his voice easy. Matsumoto Fukatechu has been walking me through the administrative side. She's been great. Ah, Ranjaku. Aizen smiled. She's capable. Though the 10th's administrative records have been somewhat inconsistent under the interim arrangement. I could offer some materials from the 5th's organizational system as a reference point. That's thoughtful. Naruto tilted his head slightly. You know, I've found that every division has its own rhythm. I'd rather learn the 10th's rhythm from inside than import someone else's structure. A beat. Very brief. The kind of beat you wouldn't notice unless you were listening for it. Of course, Aizen said. A captain who understands their division's culture is always more effective. The warmth didn't waver. I only meant to offer resources, not impose a framework. I didn't think you were imposing, Naruto said, pleasantly. I just have a preference for learning things the direct way. Another beat. This one had a different texture, the quality of a person recalibrating, not visibly, but at depth. The direct way, Aizen said. I understand. You come from Rukongai, which I imagine develops that tendency. Among other things, Naruto agreed. Aizen looked at him with the expression of a man who was deciding whether to push a line of conversation further, and deciding against it, not from retreat but from strategy. Well. If you change your mind, the offer stands. He smiled once more, the perfect warmth, the attentive pleasantness, and turned to go. Aizen Taishu, Naruto said. He turned back. Your division, Naruto said. 5th Division. Strong history. One of the oldest in the Gotei, Aizen said. I'm proud of what we've built. I bet. Naruto held his gaze for a moment, just a moment, with the particular directness of someone who wasn't performing anything, who was just looking and letting what they saw show in their eyes. Good to meet you. Aizen held the gaze. Something moved behind the pleasantness, not threat, not anger, something more precise. An assessment completed. A filing done. Likewise, he said, and left. Naruto watched him go. Kairaku appeared at his elbow with the quiet arrival of someone who'd been nearby on purpose. Talking to Aizen, he asked, with an inflection that was carefully neutral. He came over, Naruto said. He usually does, with new captains. He's very welcoming. Kairaku said it without any emphasis at all, which was its own kind of emphasis. Naruto looked at him. What do you know about him? A pause. He's an exemplary captain. 5 Division runs efficiently. His subordinates are loyal and competent. He has an impeccable record. Another pause. He's also the kind of person I've spent a long time having a specific, formless feeling about that I've never been able to justify with evidence. A formless feeling, Naruto said. The kind that wakes you up at 3 in the morning and won't explain itself. Naruto thought about the beat in Aizen's conversation. The constructed openness. The perfect smoothness of Ryatsu that should have had more personality. Yeah, he said. I know that feeling. Kairaku looked at him sidelong. You got that from one conversation. I've met people like him before, Naruto said simply. He didn't elaborate. He'd learned that elaborating on Aizen in the open was probably not productive, not until he knew more, not until he'd built the picture carefully enough to act. He's very good at what he does. The best, Kairaku agreed. Which is either entirely reassuring or the opposite, depending. Depending, Naruto said. They walked in companionable silence for a moment. Watch yourself with him, Kairaku said, and his voice had dropped the easy warmth and was something flatter and more direct underneath. Not because he'll do anything obvious. Because obvious isn't his method. I know, Naruto said. I'll be careful. He was already building the picture. Matsumoto Ranjaku was, as Hitsugaya had predicted, immediately and comprehensively delighted with him. She met him at the 10th Division's front gate on his first official morning with a bottle of something that probably wasn't tea and the expression of someone greeting a long-lost friend at an unexpected reunion. She was tall and had the kind of presence that arrived in rooms about 3 seconds before she did, and she looked at him with golden eyes that were sharper than their setting suggested. Captain, she said, with genuine warmth and a formality that was more affectionate than respectful. I've heard things. Good things. Extraordinary things, she said. Which is mostly the same and partly more interesting. She handed him the bottle. The division will be assembled in the courtyard in 20 minutes. I thought you might want a moment first. He took the bottle. Whatever was in it was strong and slightly sweet and tasted like something he'd had once at a festival a long time ago. You run the administrative side, he said. Entirely, she said cheerfully. The interim captain had many fine qualities. Organizational instinct wasn't among them. I've been the functional center of the 10th administration for 3 years. The paperwork loves me. Does it? It fears me, she amended. Which is functionally equivalent. She tilted her head. I know how captains sometimes feel about lieutenants who know where all the bodies are buried, administratively speaking. I want you to know I'm not a threat to your authority. I know, he said. She blinked. You know. You'd have maneuvered yourself into a captaincy if that was your goal, he said. You didn't. Which means you prefer to operate from where you are, which means you like the current arrangement and you're going to work with the person above you rather than against them as long as they're worth working with. A pause. She looked at him with an expression that had recalibrated slightly, the warmth still present but sharpened. Hitsugaya Taishu said you were direct. He said that? He said, verbatim, he's direct to a degree that borders on inconvenient. She smiled. He meant it as a compliment. He doesn't always know how to do those. Naruto laughed. I like him. Everyone who gets past the first layer does, Matsumoto said. The first layer is very cold. She turned toward the division courtyard, which was visible through the gate. Ready to meet them? He looked at the courtyard, the assembled officers and seated, ranked Shinigami, 200+ people in their blacks with the 10th Division's emblem, waiting to be introduced to a captain they'd been told nothing useful about and had probably heard extraordinary rumors of. He'd stood in front of assemblies before. The first time he'd addressed Konoha as Hokage, his hands had shaken behind his back, which he'd told exactly no one. He'd come a long way from that. Yeah, he said, and walked in. He didn't give a speech. That was the thing people remembered afterward, when they told each other about the first morning, that he didn't give a speech. He walked into the courtyard, looked at the assembled division for a moment, and then said, I'm Naruto. I'm your captain. I don't know most of you yet, and that's going to change. He paused. I've been told the division's patrol rotation is behind, the training schedule is stagnant, and morale is fine but could be better. We'll fix those in that order. Another pause. Questions? There was a silence. Then a third-seat officer in the middle of the second rank said, with the tentative boldness of someone who decided to be the first one to try, what's your fighting style? Naruto looked at him. Young, dark-haired, genuinely curious rather than challenging. Chaotic, he said. But I know what I'm doing in it. A ripple went through the assembly. Not quite a laugh. Something lighter. What about the Dual Zanpakuto, someone else called out, from further back, which was braver or more impulsive. He held up both hands, and let Shirkai go on both blades simultaneously, Kanton igniting, Momori deepening, the combined Ryatsu pressure rising in the courtyard like a tide coming in. He held it for 3 seconds, let everyone feel it, then released it and brought both blades back to sealed. The silence after that was a different kind of silence. That answer the question? He asked. It did. The first week in the 10th Division was organized chaos of the most productive variety. He learned names, genuinely learned them, faces and ranks and the personalities behind the ranks, which meant spending time in the division's common areas and training grounds rather than the captain's office. He drilled with the lower-ranked officers and let them see what they were dealing with, both in terms of his capability and in terms of how he fought, not distant or performing, but present and engaged and specific in his feedback. He sat with Matsumoto for 3 hours every morning going through the administrative structure and let her teach him, asking questions without self-consciousness, deferring on the things she knew better without framing it as anything other than sense. He made changes carefully and all at once, the way you reset a bone, the way you couldn't do it gently and hope for the same result. The patrol rotation was restructured in 48 hours, drawing on both Matsumoto's administrative knowledge and his own years of thinking about how to deploy people effectively in the field. The training schedule was rebuilt around ability assessment rather than rank, which ruffled some feathers among the senior officers and visibly pleased the junior ones who'd been stuck doing drills they'd outgrown 2 years ago. He was in the division's main training ground on the 5th morning, working through a combined Kido Zanpakuto sequence that he'd been developing, using Momori's defensive output to redirect incoming force rather than simply block it, letting the redirection feed back into Kanten's offensive output, when he felt Hitsugaya watching from the training ground's upper walkway. He finished the sequence, sealed both blades, and looked up. "Come down if you want." Hitsugaya came down, which meant he'd been hoping to be invited, and descended the steps with the careful dignity of someone who didn't acknowledge hoping for things. "Your officers are talking about you," he said. "Good or bad?" "Both." "As expected." He stopped at the edge of the training grounds marked area. "The restructured patrol rotation is drawing complaints from the officers who had comfortable assignments." "I know," Naruto said. "They're not wrong to be comfortable assignments aren't inherently bad. But the rotation was covering the same areas twice and leaving others uncovered, so." He shrugged. "Short-term discomfort." Hitsugaya was quiet for a moment. "You did in 5 days what the interim took 3 years to avoid doing." "The interim was managing," Naruto said. "I'm not interested in managing. I'm interested in things actually working." Hitsugaya looked at the training ground. "Your division's Ryatsu cohesion is already different," he said, which was the kind of observation that only someone very attuned to spiritual pressure would make, and it was delivered with the careful neutrality of someone who'd noticed a thing and was reporting it factually. 2 days ago it felt like individual presences. Now it feels like a division. Naruto looked at him. "Is that what it feels like in the 10th under you?" "That's what it feels like in every division that functions well," Hitsugaya said, which was not quite an answer. He paused. "It takes most new captains 6 months to achieve that cohesion." "I'm annoying like that," Naruto said. A pause. Hitsugaya's mouth twitched, once, very briefly, which was approximately the equivalent of a hearty laugh. "Yes," he said. "Consistently." He turned to leave, then stopped. "There's going to be a captain-level meeting this afternoon. Aizen has requested it. Ostensibly about coordinating between divisions on a patrol matter in the Rukongai outer districts." Naruto kept his voice even. "What do you think it's actually about?" Hitsugaya was quiet for a beat. Then, "I'm not certain. But Aizen requesting a meeting is always worth paying attention to." He paused. "In my experience." "Does he do it often?" "Often enough that I notice the pattern," Hitsugaya said. "He requests meetings when he wants to observe how captains respond to each other on a particular topic. The patrol matter will be real. But the meeting itself will be informational. For him." Naruto absorbed that. "I'll be there," he said. Hitsugaya nodded and went back up the steps. Naruto stood in the empty training ground and thought about Aizen. About the constructed openness. About the formless feelings that woke people up at 3 in the morning. He'd fought a man once, a long time ago, in another world, who'd been building towards something enormous and hidden. Who'd used every interaction as data collection, every relationship as a resource, every institution as a tool. Who'd been genuinely brilliant in the specific way that made brilliance dangerous, not because he was cruel but because he was certain, and certainty without love was the most efficient instrument of destruction there was. He'd beaten that man. Not by being smarter. By being the one thing that kind of certainty couldn't account for. He touched Kanten's hilt, briefly, and felt the familiar heat. "I see you," he thought. Not at Kurama. Not at the blade. At the shape of the thing he was just starting to understand, the outline of a plan in someone else's mind that he was just beginning to trace. "I see you." The captain meeting that afternoon was, on the surface, entirely ordinary. Aizen stood at a wall-mounted map of Rukongai's outer districts and outlined a series of hollow incursions in districts 68 through 73 that he proposed be addressed through coordinated patrol overlap between the 4th, 10th, and 13th divisions. His presentation was thorough and specific and completely reasonable, and Naruto paid attention to every word while simultaneously paying attention to everything else. The way Aizen watched the room when he was ostensibly looking at the map. The specific questions he asked, not to gather information, but to reveal what each captain prioritized, what they'd protect first, what they'd sacrifice. The way he engaged Yucatec warmly and Soy Fawn briefly and Unohana not quite directly, the small social adjustments of someone who'd mapped every personality in the room and was navigating them with perfect calibration. Naruto kept his expression attentive and neutral and said exactly 3 things during the meeting: a specific question about the 73 incursions timing that was genuinely operational and revealed nothing about his internal process, a straightforward agreement to the patrol coordination proposal, and one small observation about the logistics that was useful and unremarkable. He watched Aizen process each of these. The small adjustments in Aizen's focus when Naruto spoke. The way he filed and moved on. After the meeting, as the captains dispersed, Aizen didn't come to him this time. He went to Yucatec, and then to Kairaku, warm and collegial, and Naruto watched from across the room and let him. Unohana appeared at his side. She didn't look at him. She looked at the map Aizen had been using. "You were very quiet," she said. "Listening," he said. "What did you hear?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Nothing I can prove. Everything I believe." She turned her head and looked at him with the deep, patient attention she brought to everything. "Be careful with what you believe until it becomes what you know," she said quietly. "This institution has structures and histories that reward patience." "I'm patient," he said. She looked at him steadily. He smiled. "When it matters." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did, a warmth, subtle and genuine. "The meeting about patrol coordination is real," she said. "The incursions are real. Focus on those first." "I will," he said. She left. He stood at the edge of the room and let his eyes drift, casually, to Aizen across the space, who was laughing at something Kairaku had said with the warmth of genuine fellowship. Aizen looked over. Their eyes met. For about a second and a half, they held each other's gaze across the room, nothing threatening, nothing declaring, just 2 people seeing each other and allowing the seeing. Aizen smiled. Polite. Warm. Giving away nothing. Naruto nodded once. The nod of a man acknowledging a person clearly, without pretense. Aizen's smile didn't change. But the calculation behind it moved, and Naruto felt it shift the way you feel weather shifting before the rain comes. Then someone spoke to Aizen and he turned away, and it was over. Naruto picked up his captain's Haori from the chair he'd hung it on and walked out. The 10th Division's evenings had a specific rhythm, quieter than the day, most officers back in barracks or off duty, the building settling into its structural sounds. He'd taken to spending an hour in the evening on the roof, which was flat and had a good view of the sky and was quiet enough that he could have an actual conversation with Kurama rather than the running background communication they kept during busy hours. He was up there when Rukia found him. He heard her footsteps on the access stairs before she appeared, and he'd already shifted to make room on the edge. She sat down beside him and looked at the sky, which was doing something beautiful with clouds and fading light that neither of them acknowledged verbally because some things were fine to just experience. "I heard the captain meeting was unremarkable," she said after a while. "Completely," he agreed. A pause. "Renji says you made 2/3 of the 10th Division terrified of you and the other third competitive with you inside of a week." "That's about right," Naruto said. "The competitive ones will be better for it. The terrified ones will stop being terrified when they see me actually work with them." "He also says your patrol rotation restructure is being talked about in the 6th Division," she said. "As an example of what they should have done 2 years ago." He turned to look at her. "Renji talks a lot about what's happening in the 10th Division." She looked firmly at the sky. "He's observant. He's been watching you talk about what's happening in the 10th Division, Naruto said, and reporting back. The tips of Rukia's ears went slightly pink, which she would never have admitted. "That's a very specific interpretation. It's the accurate one." He looked back at the sky. "How is he?" "Ambitious. Frustrated. Growing." She paused. "He wants to be lieutenant. He'll get there." He'll get there soon if he keeps the pace he's at, Naruto said. I've seen him in the 11th joint drills. He's serious. Rukia was quiet for a moment, and the quality of her quiet shifted to something more personal, less conversational. You said you'd tell me, she said. About Kurama. He looked at her. When there was enough time, she said. It's evening. I have time. He looked back at the sky. He thought about how to start, not about what to say. He'd never been precious about the telling, but about where to begin in a story that was so much bigger than any individual telling. There's a concept in the world I came from, he said. Tailed beasts. Creatures of pure chakra, ancient and enormous, given form and will. The 9 tails was the strongest of them. He paused. He was sealed inside me the day I was born. Rukia was very still. It wasn't consensual, he said. For either of us. He was taken from where he was living and forced into a human child because my father, who was my village's greatest warrior and a better man than anyone deserved, saw no other way to stop something terrible from happening. He let that sit for a moment. I grew up knowing something massive and angry was inside me, and being afraid of it, and being told to be afraid of it. But you stopped being afraid, Rukia said quietly. Eventually. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile with weight behind it. He was alone in there for a long time. Furious and trapped and treated like a weapon. He had every right to be what people said he was. He touched his chest. He wasn't, though. That's what I found out. Underneath the fury there was something that had been hurt and isolated for centuries and was angry about it, which made complete sense once I stopped being afraid long enough to actually look. The sky had gone to deep blue above them, stars coming out at the edges. We fought each other for years, he said. Real fights, inside my own mind. He tried to take over, I pushed back. It was ungraceful. But it was honest. He paused. The first time he actually helped me, it was because I was going to die and he didn't want me to. Neither of us admitted that's what it was for a long time. Rukia was watching his face. It took a long time to become what we are, he said. Partners. The real kind, not the kind that looks cooperative from outside. The kind where you know what the other person needs without being told and you provide it even when it's inconvenient. He felt the warmth in his chest, steady and old and present. He's been with me through everything. The wars, the building, the losses, the everything. He paused. I died surrounded by people I loved and I was sad to leave them, but I wasn't afraid, partly because I knew he'd be there on the other side. A long silence. He's here, Rukia said finally. It wasn't a question. He's always here, Naruto said. He's part of what I am now. Not separate, not a passenger. Just, part. He paused. The 2 blades are him, in a way. Kantan is the fire that fights. Memori is the fire that protects. He was always both, I just didn't understand it until much later. Rukia looked down at her hands. In Soul Society, she said slowly, we talk about Zanpakuto as the manifestation of a Shinigami's soul. Their truest expression. She looked up. Your Zanpakuto is the manifestation of both of you. Yeah, he said. I think that's right. She was quiet for a moment. Then, with the particular honesty she used when she'd decided to just say the thing, that's the most extraordinary thing I've ever heard. He looked at her. She was looking back, completely direct, without the Shinigami professionalism or the careful positioning. Just genuine. Just herself. It's just my life, he said. Most of it felt ordinary when I was living it. She shook her head slowly. I don't think you've ever been ordinary. No, he agreed. But I've always been from somewhere. He paused. That's the part that matters. Not what you can do. Where you're from. Who you carry with you. Rukia was quiet for a long moment. Somewhere below them, the 10th Division settled into its evening sounds. Then she said, "I'm from the 78th District. Before Byakuya adopted me." She said it simply, without drama. People from the 78th District are not supposed to become Shinigami. Definitely not supposed to be lieutenants of the 13th. And yet, he said. And yet, she agreed. They sat in the comfortable silence of people who've understood something true about each other, while the stars arranged themselves above Siriidii in patterns that were different from any sky either of them had been born under. 3 days later, Naruto found the discrepancy. He hadn't been looking for it, he'd been going through the 10th Division's historical incident reports, because understanding the division's history was part of understanding how to lead it, and he'd developed the habit of reading thoroughly and asking questions. The report was from 8 months ago. A hollow incursion in District 50, unusual in its formation, not standard hollow behavior, more organized, targeted at specific souls in the district rather than random feeding. The incident report noted the anomaly and then noted that 5th Division had provided analytical support and concluded the behavior was within parameters of known hollow variation. He read it twice. Then he pulled 3 more reports. 6 months ago. 11 months ago. 14 months ago. Different districts, different hollow behaviors, all flagged as anomalous, all analytically resolved by 5th Division support. All concluded within parameters. He sat at the captain's desk in the 10th Division's administrative office with a lamp and 4 incident reports and felt the same sensation he'd felt in Aizen's conversation, the beat, the infinitesimal pause between performance and truth. Organized hollow behavior. He thought about what Aizen had presented in the captain meeting. Districts 68 through 73. Hollow incursions, proposal for coordinated patrol overlap. He thought about what coordinated patrol overlap required, structurally, which districts would be reduced in coverage to increase coverage elsewhere. He got a map. He laid it out on the desk and marked the proposed patrol changes. Then he marked the historical anomalous incursions. He looked at the pattern for a long time. He picked up a brush and wrote a note to himself, very small, in the margin of his own notepad, not random. He folded the notepad into his uniform pocket. He sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment, feeling the warm double presence of Kantan and Momori at his sides, and he thought about what Unohana had said, be careful with what you believe until it becomes what you know. He didn't have what he knew yet. But he had the shape of it. And he had time, and he was patient, and he was very good at watching people without letting them know he was watching. He thought of Sasuke, suddenly, not with sadness, the memory had been old when he died, the way Sasuke had always been the strategist between them, the one who built pictures from details. He'd always been the one who acted, while Sasuke analyzed. He was both of them now, in a way. He'd had to be, for 20 years of leading a village. He'd learned to build the picture and then act on it, and to know the difference between the 2 stages. He wasn't ready to act yet. But he was watching. And he was building. He put the lamp out and went to find Matsumoto, because there was patrol rotation work to finalize, and because the most dangerous thing he could do right now was be exactly what he appeared to be, a new captain, learning his division, doing his job, unremarkably present. Aizen expected him to be impressive and obvious. He'd be thorough instead. He'd been thorough before with much worse odds. He always figured it out in the end. Chapter 5, The Nine-Tailed Captain. The scouts came on a Tuesday. Naruto knew they were there before they made a move, had known, in the vague and specific way that very old instincts communicated, since early morning when something in the ambient Ryatsu of Siriidii shifted slightly. Not an alarm. Just a wrongness, faint as smoke from a distant fire, the kind of thing that most people's senses filtered out as background variation. His didn't filter anything out. He went about his morning normally. Division drills at 6th hour. Administrative review with Matsumoto at 8th. A joint patrol coordination meeting with Yukate's 13th Division at 10th. He ate lunch in the division's common hall with 3 of his lower-ranked officers because he did that twice a week and he wasn't going to stop because someone was watching. He noted 4 of them by midday. Ryatsu signatures he didn't recognize, not Shinigami, not hollow, something else, something with a quality he didn't have a name for yet, cold and precise and thoroughly suppressed, professional concealment at a level that would have been invisible to anyone not carrying something as sensitive as Kurama's awareness inside them. They were good. They were patient. They were waiting for something, a context, an opportunity, a moment of isolation that would make whatever they were planning clean. He made sure they didn't get one until he chose to give it. At the 14th hour, after the joint meeting, he walked through the 10th Division's inner training ground toward the administrative building and deliberately took the long route, through the secondary courtyard, past the storage buildings, into a stretch of the compound that was quiet at this hour and had no natural foot traffic. He unsealed neither blade. His hands were loose at his sides. He looked, to any observer, like a captain taking a slightly inefficient route home. The first one came over the wall. Then 2 more from the rooftops, and the 4th from behind the storage building on his left, the pattern of people who'd coordinated their approach and were precise about geometry. He stopped walking. They were tall, wearing white uniforms that he didn't recognize, moving with the fluid efficiency of elite fighters who'd done this many times. Their Ryatsu was cold when it released, that was the word for it, cold, like a blade left in winter air, sharp and refined in a way that was entirely unlike anything Shinigami Ryatsu felt like. Arrows of pure refined energy were already drawn, aimed, and he had approximately a second and a half. He moved in the half-second. Shunpa carried him sideways, between 2 of the arrow trajectories, and he heard the arrows hit the courtyard stone behind him with sounds like struck bells. He came out of the step 10 meters to the right with both blades already in Shirkai, Kantan igniting, Memori deepening, and turned to look at them. 4 figures in white, with masks or partially masked faces, silver and cold, their Ryatsu now fully released and unmistakable. Not Shinigami. Not hollow. Something controlled and ancient and furious underneath the control. Quincy, he said, tasting the word he'd heard in briefings and never encountered. The nearest one spoke. His voice was measured and precise, the voice of someone delivering a message rather than a threat, Uzumaki Naruto. Captain, 10th Division. You have been identified as an anomalous variable in the balance of souls. The Wandenrake has determined that your continued presence in Soul Society constitutes an unacceptable. You came to kill me, Naruto said. A brief pause. To eliminate an anomaly. Same thing, he said pleasantly. Can I ask who sent you? His Majesty determines all, His Majesty, Naruto repeated. He filed that away, His Majesty, a king, a hierarchy, a structure beyond these 4 that had resources and intelligence and reached deep enough to find him and identify him as a problem worth resources. That was interesting. That was, in fact, more than interesting. So someone's been watching Soul Society carefully enough to notice me, decide I'm a problem, and send 4 people to deal with it quietly. He tilted his head. I've been here 4 months. None of the 4 said anything. That's fast, he said. That's a very fast response to a new variable. Which means the watching was already happening, and I just triggered something that was already in place. He looked at them steadily, not aggressive, not afraid, just genuinely thinking through it out loud the way he'd always processed things. So whatever's being built, it's been building for a long time. And I'm in the way of it. You talk too much, the nearest one said, and fired. He moved. The first minute was fast and gorgeous in the way that fights between elite practitioners were always fast and gorgeous, which was to say almost entirely without spectacle and almost entirely lethal, everything stripped to its essentials, no performance, just the brutal efficiency of people who knew exactly what they were doing. They were extraordinary fighters. All 4 of them, coordinated beyond what simple training produced, working in overlapping patterns that were designed to deny him clean engagement angles. Their arrows were refined spiritual energy delivered with a precision that made Kido look blunt, punching through the air without the Ryatsu dispersion that most energy attacks showed. He felt the first one graze his shoulder, a cut, not a hit, because he'd been half a second ahead of where they'd projected him to be. Kantan flared in response, instinctively, and the fire that came off the blade incinerated the next 3 arrows before they reached him. He was already moving into the gap. The thing about fighting multiple coordinated opponents was that coordination was a strength with a specific weakness. It required prediction, and prediction required your opponent to be somewhat predictable. He'd spent his entire life being the most unpredictable fighter in any room because his instincts operated faster than his conscious mind, and his conscious mind had long since stopped trying to slow them down. He hit the first Quincy with Momori's flat, not a kill strike. He'd made a decision in the first 5 seconds that he wanted answers before endings, and the defensive pulse that ran through the blade on contact released outward, an expanding ring of blue-gold Ryatsu that lifted all 4 of them off their feet simultaneously. They were airborne for a second and a half. He used it. Shuunpa carried him to the second one, Kantan's flame already shaped into a concentrated spiral at the blade's tip, and he drove it into the Quincy's bow, not the person, the weapon, because bows meant distance, and without distance their formation collapsed. The bow shattered with a sound like a breaking string on a massive instrument. He was already at the third one. The fourth came at him from behind with a short blade that had appeared from somewhere in the white uniform, and it was good, it was a genuinely good move, timed to catch him mid-engagement. But he felt the cold Ryatsu on the edge of Kurama's awareness half a second before it reached him, and he dropped flat and let it go over him, and the short blade passed through the air where his back had been. He came up inside the fourth one's guard with Momori pressed to their throat, the rounded, unedged side, deliberate, and Kantan held back, restrained but burning, pointed at the other 3. Stillness. He was breathing a little harder than normal. The cut on his shoulder had bled through his uniform. One of the Quincy had a broken bow and was reassessing from a position of disadvantage. The other 2 had their weapons up but hadn't fired, because at this distance anything they aimed at him passed through their colleague first. "I want to know who sent you specifically," Naruto said, to the one with Momori at their throat. His voice was level. "Not His Majesty, not the Wandenrake. A name. A rank. Something real." The Quincy's Ryatsu spiked, preparation for something, a last technique, the particular quality of someone choosing ending over capture. He felt it and pressed Momori forward slightly, not hard, just present. "I'm not going to kill you," he said. "But I need you to believe that before you make a decision you can't take back." A pause that had weight in it. "The decision to come here was made at command level," the Quincy said finally, through clenched precision. Hashwolf. The right arm. Naruto filed it. Hashwolf. Right arm. So whoever sits at the top of this, he's the one who decides which threats are worth sending people for. He looked at the other 3. "You're going back," he said. "When you do, give your right arm a message for me." None of them spoke. "Tell him I'm watching," Naruto said. "Tell him Soul Society has a variable now that doesn't work the way the others do. And tell him," he paused, and let Kurama's warmth rise in his chest, let it come through his voice the way it sometimes did, the double resonance, the layer beneath the layer that made people feel in their bones that they were talking to something ancient and entire. "Tell him to think very carefully about whether the plans that were built without accounting for me can survive me being in them." He lowered Momori. The 4 Quincy exchanged something that wasn't quite a look, a collective assessment, a recalibration, and then they were gone, Shuunpa or something like it, their Ryatsu signatures vanishing over Suriidi's walls. He stood in the empty secondary courtyard with both blades still in Shirkai, breathing, the cut on his shoulder stinging. Then he felt the other presences. He turned. Byakuya Kuchiki was standing at the courtyard entrance, with the absolute stillness of someone who hadn't moved and wasn't pretending otherwise. His captain's Haori was immaculate. His face was arranged in its standard expression, which was a kind of architectural perfection of composure, beautiful and entirely unreadable. He'd been there long enough to have seen most of it. Naruto looked at him. Byakuya looked back. They'd interacted twice since Naruto's appointment, briefly, formally, in captain meetings. Byakuya had not been among the 7 who voted for integration and had not been among the 3 who voted against. He'd been one of the 2 who abstained, which Naruto had clocked as the position of someone gathering information before committing. Kuchiki Taishu, Naruto said. Uzumaki Taishu, Byakuya said. His voice was the same as his face, composed, exact, giving nothing away. Did you follow me, or was this coincidental? A pause. I was in the administrative building adjacent, Byakuya said. When your Ryatsu released, I investigated. And stayed to watch. Another pause. Slightly longer. Yes. Naruto sealed both blades. The fire went out, the warmth settled, and the courtyard's ambient Ryatsu returned to normal. He pressed his free hand to the cut on his shoulder and felt Momori's residual warmth do something minor and helpful about the bleeding. Quincy, he said. You recognized them? Yes. Byakuya came forward 3 steps, not close, but no longer at the entrance, a middle ground that was its own statement. The Wandenrake. We have intelligence about their existence. It's above lieutenant classification. He paused. You shouldn't have been in their sights this quickly. I know, Naruto said. I'm a variable they didn't expect. Variables are threats to people who've planned carefully. Byakuya was quiet for a moment. He was looking at Naruto with the particular focus that very intelligent people brought to things they were processing against their existing framework, not hostility, just the genuine effort of fitting something into a picture it didn't quite fit yet. You knew they were there, he said. Before they approached. Since morning. And you chose the location and timing of the engagement deliberately. I didn't want them near civilians, Naruto said. Byakuya looked at the marks on the courtyard stone where the Quincy arrows had struck. He looked at the place where the broken bough had fallen, which still had faint blue-white light at its edges. He looked at Naruto's face. You let them go, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the observation of a man who had very specific views about protocol and was currently setting them aside in favor of understanding. I wanted the message delivered, Naruto said. Dead scouts deliver nothing. Rattled scouts who go back with a specific message, he paused. It changes the calculation. You're playing against something you haven't fully mapped yet, Byakuya said. Yes. That's, Byakuya stopped. Reorganized. It was, Naruto thought, genuinely unusual to see Byakuya Kuchiki reorganize in real time. A captain's responsibility is to his division and to the Gotei 13's protocols. Engaging enemy combatants alone and releasing them without, if I'd called for backup, Naruto said, they'd have scattered before anyone arrived, the engagement would have happened anyway but without the controlled setting, and I'd have no message delivered and no information gathered. He paused. With respect, Kuchiki Taishu, the protocols are built for standard situations. I made a judgment call. Judgment calls by individual captains operating outside protocol are how institutional structures break down, Byakuya said. Institutional structures that can't accommodate judgment calls in non-standard situations are how people die unnecessarily, Naruto said. Not sharp. Just, true, delivered with the flatness of someone who'd seen it both ways. I've lost people to both failures. I'm trying to avoid both. A silence. A real one, with weight and substance. Byakuya looked at him for a long moment, the full weight of whatever he was, the centuries of constructed composure, the intelligence behind the architecture. Looking, the way he apparently didn't let himself look often. You need to report this, he said finally. I know, Naruto said. I'm going now. I'll accompany you, Byakuya said. Naruto looked at him. You don't have to. I know, Byakuya said, in a tone that indicated they were done discussing it. They walked to the First Division's administrative building side by side, in silence, which was its own kind of conversation. Yamamoto's response to the report was a stillness so complete it felt geological. He sat behind his desk and listened to Naruto's account without interruption, and when it was done he was quiet for long enough that it began to feel like the silence itself was a response. "The Wandenrake," he said finally, "has identified and targeted a captain of the Gotei 13 within 4 months of his appointment." "Within 4 months of my arrival in Soul Society," Naruto said. "The targeting was probably earlier than the appointment. You believe your Ryatsu signature is detectable at a distance sufficient for their intelligence network. I believe Kurama's chakra, Ryatsu, is distinctive enough to register as a specific kind of threat to people who've been watching spiritual power for a long time," Naruto said. "Something old and outside their framework. That would get attention." "You're telling me," Yamamoto said, "that a being sealed within you is functionally visible to an enemy intelligence network." "I'm telling you that it's possible, and that the timing suggests it." The old man folded his hands. Byakuya stood off to the side with his hands in his sleeves, and Naruto could feel the attention Byakuya was paying, comprehensive and quiet, still gathering. "The message you sent," Yamamoto said. "You told them you were watching." "Yes." "You told them their plans would have to account for you." "Yes." A pause. "That is either a very dangerous piece of arrogance," Yamamoto said, "or it is the most strategically sound piece of psychological pressure available in that moment." "It's both," Naruto said. "But it's more the second." Yamamoto looked at him steadily. "Explain." "Whoever is running the Wandenrake has been building towards something for a long time," Naruto said. "Long enough to have plans, structures, accounts for every variable they know about. The thing that destabilizes long-term planning isn't a more powerful enemy, it's an unaccounted variable that knows it's unaccounted for and says so." He paused. "I wanted them to know that I know. Because that changes the calculation on their side in ways they can't completely control. It also," Yamamoto said, "makes you a priority target." "I already was," Naruto said. "They sent 4 people to kill me quietly. Making it loud only disadvantages them, not me." Another silence. Byakuya spoke for the first time since entering the room. "He's not wrong," he said. His voice was level and gave nothing away about what it cost him to say it. Yamamoto looked at Byakuya. Something passed between them, the shorthand of people who'd worked together for a long time. Then he looked back at Naruto. "The Wandenrake matter will be elevated to the captain's full council," he said. "Your report will be included. The intelligence you gathered, the name Hashwolf, the rank structure it implies, will be processed." He paused. "You will not engage Quincy operatives alone again without reporting to me first." "Understood," Naruto said. "That was not a negotiation," Yamamoto said. "I know," Naruto said. "I said I understood." A beat. The closest thing to acknowledgement Yamamoto gave was a fractional shift in the set of his shoulders. "Dismissed." Naruto turned to go. Then he stopped and looked back. "The 5th Division's analytical conclusions on the anomalous hollow incursion reports," he said. "From 8 to 14 months ago. I'd like to review the original data, not the conclusions." A silence of a very specific texture. "That's an unusual request," Yamamoto said. "It is," Naruto agreed. "May I ask your reason?" "I want to see if the data supports the conclusions," Naruto said simply. Yamamoto looked at him for a long moment. Naruto held it, completely level, completely calm, nothing in his expression that was a challenge or a declaration, just a man making a reasonable request. "I'll have the original report sent to the 10th Division, Yamamoto said. "Thank you," Naruto said. He left. In the corridor outside, Byakuya fell into step beside him without a word. They walked for a while in silence before Byakuya said, "The 5th Division's analytical conclusions on those reports are considered definitive." "I know," Naruto said. "You're suggesting they might not be." "I'm suggesting I want to read the original data." Byakuya was quiet for a moment. "And if you find what you're apparently looking for?" Naruto looked at him. "I'll know what I know," he said. "And then I'll figure out what to do about it." Byakuya's expression didn't change. But he didn't argue. He didn't sleep that night. Not from anxiety. The cut on his shoulder had been properly treated by Unohana's division and was already closing, and he was physically fine, and his mind was the kind of active that was useful rather than distressed. He sat cross-legged on his bed in the dark and went inward, the full version of the internal conversation with Kurama, not the running commentary but the deep dive, the kind that required stillness. The space inside him where Kurama existed was enormous and warm, lit by the impression of amber light, the faint suggestion of vast tales and the older impression of something that had chosen, long ago, to be something other than what it was first made to be. Today, Naruto thought. Kurama's response was layered, acknowledgement, assessment, and underneath both of those something that felt like, finally something worth the full reach. 4 of them, Naruto thought. Good. Really good. And you handled them, Kurama returned. The tone was not boastful. Just factual. With a warmth underneath that was older than the words. The king they mentioned, Naruto thought. His Majesty. What do you feel from that? A long pause. Then Kurama's response came in impressions rather than words, something ancient, something that had been building for an extremely long time, a patience that made even Kurama's own considerable patience seem brief. Something that wanted something so fundamental it had organized an entire people around wanting it. Old, Naruto translated. Older than soul society. Older than the current structure of things. The impression that came back was affirmation. Alright, Naruto thought. We've dealt with old and enormous before. Kurama's response to that was something that felt like, we have. And we're still here. Still here, Naruto agreed. He opened his eyes and looked at the dark ceiling. Then he looked at the 2 blades leaning against the wall, their faint ambient glow visible in the dark, orange-red on the right, blue-gold on the left, the twin fires, the 2 faces of the same ancient thing. There's something building, he told them, told Kurama, told himself, told whatever the universe was that kept sending him toward things that needed dealing with. Something big, something long in the making. And there's something closer, someone inside this institution who's not what he appears. He let out a slow breath. I'm going to have to be both things at once, he said. The captain who builds and the one who watches. The one who protects and the one who fights. He paused. I've done that before. He picked up Kantan with his right hand and held the sealed blade in the dark, feeling the heat of it, the familiar weight, the alive intelligence of the spirit within. Tell me what you're called, he said. Not for the first time. But differently than before, not a question, just an opening. The response came the way it always came, not in words he could write down, but in a voice that was like sound made of heat, like the crackling articulation of a fire that had learned language because it wanted to be understood. You already know us, the voice said. We are what we've always been. What you made room for. Yeah, he said. He picked up Momori in his left hand. Yeah, I know. He held both blades in the dark and felt the complete circuit of them, Kantan burning outward, Momori holding inward, the destruction and the protection, the same fire aimed at the world and aimed at the people he loved, which had always been the same impulse in his chest even before he understood it. Bankai, he said quietly. To no one. To both of them. Testing the weight of the word. The response from both blades simultaneously was not eagerness or impatience. It was the feeling of a door already built, already set in its frame, waiting for someone to decide it was time to open it. When you're ready, the voice said, in the double tone that was Kantan and Momori and Kurama and something even older underneath all of those. Not before. We don't need to prove anything. I know, he said. I'm just thinking about when. You'll know, the voice said. You always do. He set both blades down and lay back and stared at the ceiling, and thought about the shape of the thing that was coming, not with dread, not with the exhausted readiness of someone who'd been fighting all their life and couldn't stop, but with the particular focused calm of someone who'd chosen this, who'd looked at what was in front of them and decided it was worth giving everything to. He'd chosen Konoha, once. He'd chosen to be Hokage not because it was expected but because he'd looked at the village and thought, I can make this better, and I want to, and I'm going to. He looked at Seoul society with the same eyes now, at the 10th division, at the captains who'd voted for him and the ones who were still deciding, at Rukia sitting on rooftops and Hitsugaya being accidentally fond of him and Matsumoto running the administrative side of everything with cheerful iron competence, at Unohana who saw clearly and Kairaku who saw everything and Byakuya who was still building his picture. At Aizen who was building something in the dark. At a king somewhere beyond Siriidi's walls, watching and planning. Alright, he thought. Let's build something worth protecting. 3 days later, the Jillian came. Not 1. 7. They came from the direction of the outer Rukongai, moving in a cluster that was unmistakably coordinated, not the wandering behavior of wild hollows but directed movement, targeting, the same pattern he'd flagged in the historical incident reports but at a scale that removed all doubt about its nature. The alert went through Siriidii like a struck bell. Every captain's Ryatsu spiked in the signature of instant activation. Naruto was in the training ground when it hit and he was already moving in the second it took to understand the shape of it. 7 Jillian, cluster formation, outer districts, souls in the feeding radius. He went through the outer wall using Shunpa at full extension, which covered the distance to the Rukongai border in 11 seconds, which was fast enough that he arrived before the nearest other captain by a margin that surprised even him. The 7 Minos Grande were enormous, bigger than the one he'd dissolved 3 months ago, or maybe it was just the 7 of them together that made the air feel compressed. They were arranged in a rough arc formation, which was deeply wrong for wild hollows, and the feeding draw was already active, pulling the spiritual pressure of the Rukongai souls around them in that slow, terrible tide. Civilians on the ground. Souls staggering, dropping. He didn't stop moving. He covered the last distance in one Shunpa step and came out of it between the Minos formation and the nearest cluster of affected souls, both blades in Shirkai before he landed, and let his Ryatsu go fully. Not managed. Not aimed. Fully. The air cracked. The orange-gold pressure wave that expanded from him when he stopped managing it hit all 7 Minos simultaneously, not as an attack but as a presence, the weight of something older and larger than any of them, radiating outward in all directions, burning the feeding draw back like a wind reversing, pushing the Minos collective Ryatsu away from the souls on the ground. Feeding hollows needed proximity and pressure. He removed the pressure. The souls on the ground gasped, stirred, began to come back. The 7 Minos turned their masks toward him. All 7 at once. The combined attention of 7 Jillian-class hollows focused on a single point was an enormous amount of malevolent pressure, and he felt it land on him like weather, heavy, dark, hungry. The masks cracked and rasped with the particular sound of things that had been animals once, a long time ago, and had forgotten everything except appetite. He stood in the middle of it with his coat moving in the displaced air and felt completely, entirely himself. 7, he said, to Kantan and Momori. The response from both blades was the feeling of, ready. 1 at a time, he said. I want them away from the civilians first. He moved. He didn't use the same technique as before, the close-range mask strike worked for 1 Minos, not 7. He used something he'd been developing, a combination of Kantan's offensive output and Shunpa's speed that turned him into something between a fighter and a force of nature, approaching each Minos in the brief window between their individual reactions, driving Kantan's flame into the mask crack of the nearest one with a concentrated burst, not the full output he could have used but enough, targeted like a key in a lock. The first dissolved in 12 seconds. The second turned to track him and he was already gone, flanking, coming at the third from the direction the second had been in, using the Minos' own mass and the direction of its turn against it. The third dissolved in 9 seconds. He was dimly aware of other Ryatsu signatures arriving, captain level, the cold pressure of Hitsugaya's ice, the familiar warmth of Unohana, something vast and sharp that he clocked as Zaraki, but he didn't slow down. 3 down, 4 remaining, and the souls on the ground were recovering but still vulnerable, and the Minos were beginning to restructure their formation. He drove Momori's blade into the ground. The blue-gold light that expanded from the point of impact was not offensive, it was a field, a wide-spreading warmth that covered the area around the souls on the ground. Momori's protective output pushed through the earth and up, creating a barrier between the remaining Minos feeding draw and the civilians. Their recovery accelerated. He pulled Momori free and went back on offense with both blades. The fourth and fifth came at him simultaneously, deliberate, coordinated, the jaws of Minos-class hollows trying to trap him between them. He went up instead of sideways, vertical Shunpa carrying him 20 feet off the ground, inverting above the nearest mask, and came down with Kantan leading, all of the blade's output focused in a single directed strike that went through the mask and out the other side. The fourth dissolved mid-roar. He was in the air above the fifth before the sound finished, and Momori's blade came around in a wide arc that used the protective energy like a concussive wave, cracking the mask from outside in, a different approach, inverse to how he'd been doing it, and it worked differently, faster, because the protective Reiatsu destabilized the hollow's cohesion rather than breaking it by force. The fifth dissolved. Two remaining, and they weren't coordinating anymore, they were retreating, which was wrong for hollows. Hollows didn't retreat, and the fact that these ones were attempting to was the most alarming thing he'd seen yet. He went after them. He caught the sixth before it made the outer wall, Kantan's fire arcing ahead of him in a wide sweeping strike that cut off the retreat angle, and the Minos turned to face him with its mask already cracked from his earlier pass. He drove the final strike home clean and it came apart. The seventh was already beyond the outer wall. He went over it. On the other side, in the open landscape beyond Siriidii, the seventh Minos was moving fast, faster than Minos moved, propelled by something, maybe by whatever had coordinated them in the first place, the same intelligence that had aimed them at the civilian districts rather than the Shinigami fortifications. Moving away. Being pulled away. He felt the pull. It wasn't hollow power. It was something else, cold and refined and deliberately applied, somewhere distant, withdrawing the coordinated asset now that the plan had failed. Withdrawing it for later. He felt something shift in him, not anger, exactly, something sharper and older than anger, the feeling of looking at something genuinely malevolent and choosing not to look away. Bankai, he thought. Not to Kurama. Just the word, sitting in his mind, solid as stone. The door that had been built and waiting answered immediately. He didn't say it aloud. He didn't release it with a word. He just opened the door, gave permission to the thing that had been waiting, the enormity in his chest, the full cooperation of Naruto and Kurama in a space that had no further room for restraint, and it came through. The sound was not like anything that had happened before. It was like a chord struck on an instrument made of something larger than sound, deep and vast and reverberant, filling the landscape outside Siriidii's walls with a resonance that made the ground vibrate and the distant trees shudder and the seventh Minos stop moving because the thing that was pulling it had, presumably, registered what was happening and made a decision about whether to continue. Both blades dissolved. They didn't disappear. They became something else, the steel, the fire, the warmth, all of it coming apart into Reiatsu and reforming, not as blades but as a presence around him, within him, extending through him. 9 trails of light, foxfire, orange gold, the color of Kurama's eyes in the dark of that internal space, extended from him like tails, each one a distinct stream of enormous spiritual energy, each one both things simultaneously, offensive and protective, Kantan and Momori, not 2 blades but 9 aspects of one complete truth. He was, for the duration, visibly 2 things at once, the man he was, standing in the field outside Siriidii with his coat dissolving into light, and the shape of what lived inside him, translucent and vast, the 9-tailed fox rendered in pure Reiatsu, enormous and bright and unambiguously ancient. The seventh Minos looked at him. Then it dissolved. Not from a strike. Just, dissolved, the way things sometimes did when they encountered something so far above them on the scale of existence that the encounter itself was too much. He stood in the field for a moment. The 9 tails of foxfire swayed slowly, like something breathing. Then he let the Bankai release, and it came back into him like a tide returning, smooth, complete, the blades reforming in his hands as they'd always been, and the landscape returned to its ordinary quiet except for the faint scorch marks in a rough circle around him where the Ryatsu had touched the ground. He breathed. He turned around. Byakuya was standing on top of Siriidi's outer wall, 20 meters above him, in the exact stillness of someone who had stopped moving entirely because there was nothing else to do. Behind Byakuya, Hitsugaya stood with Hyarinmaru still in Shirkai, ice crystals half dissolved in the air around him, his teal eyes fixed on Naruto with an expression that had been stripped of every layer of professional composure and was just, open. Young and old simultaneously. The expression of someone who'd seen something they'd needed to see without knowing they needed it. Zaraki was there too, which Naruto only realized when the enormous captain dropped off the wall to land in the field below it, kicking up dust, and walked toward him with the direct purpose of someone who'd made a decision. Naruto looked at him. Zaraki stopped 2 meters away. Looked at the scorch marks. Looked at Naruto. Looked at the space where the Minos had been. Back at Naruto. That was Bankai, Zaraki said. Yes, Naruto said. First one. Yes. Zaraki was quiet for a moment. His Ryatsu, which was always enormous and uncontained, the baseline of someone who'd never bothered to learn control because control seemed counterproductive to his goals, did something Naruto had never felt from him, it pulled back, slightly. Not suppression. Something more like respect, expressed in the only language Zaraki really had. Okay, Zaraki said. Which was everything and nothing. He turned and walked back toward the wall. Naruto looked back up at the wall. Byakuya hadn't moved. He was looking down at Naruto with the expression of a man who'd come to the end of a very long calculation and arrived at a result he hadn't predicted. Naruto looked back at him. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. After a long moment, Byakuya turned away and walked back along the top of the wall toward Siriidi's interior, his captain's Haori moving in the afterbreeze of the Bankai release. He didn't say anything either. But he'd stood there and watched, and something in the architecture of his expression had changed, and that was its own kind of words. That evening Naruto sat against the wall of the 10th Division's secondary courtyard, the one with the marks from the Quincy arrows still on the stone, which he'd decided to leave there for now as a kind of record, and pressed his back against the warm stone and closed his eyes. Matsumoto brought him something warm to drink and sat down next to him without asking, which was the right thing to do. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. 7 Minos, she said eventually. 7, he agreed. Coordinated. Very. And after the Quincy 3 days ago. She turned her head to look at him. Things are moving. They've been moving for a long time, he said. We just have better visibility now. She looked at him steadily. Are you scared? He thought about it, genuinely, not performing equanimity. Was he scared? He felt the familiar warmth in his chest, the steady presence of Kurama, the banked heat of the 2 blades. He thought about the Bankai, the 9 tails of foxfire, the feeling of being completely and entirely himself without restraint or management. No, he said. Honest. She nodded slowly. The division is talking, she said. About you. About today. Good or bad? Different than before, she said. It's not fear anymore. It's, they know what you are now. What you can do. She paused. That changes things. It usually does, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the matter-of-fact directness of someone who decided something, I'm glad you're the captain here. He looked at her. The 10th's been directionless, she said. A good division without someone to lead it somewhere. That's a waste. She picked up her drink and looked at the courtyard. You're going to take it somewhere. Yeah, he said. That's the plan. She nodded. Let the silence settle back into something comfortable. He looked up at the sky. Stars, different from Konoha's, different from any sky he'd been born under. But stars. He reached inward to Kurama, not for a conversation, just to feel the presence, the warmth, the companionship, the thing that had been true about him since the day he was born and would be true until whatever came after this. You still there? He thought, the same question he'd asked in District 64 on his first night, sitting on a ruined rooftop. Kurama's response was immediate and layered and enormous and completely familiar. I'm always here, it said. In the double tone, the voice of both blades, the voice of 9 tails and a Hokage's will and a bond built over decades of learning to love each other well. You know that? Yeah, Naruto said, out loud, very quietly. Matsumoto glanced at him. Sorry, he said. Talking to myself. Are you? She said, with the perceptive gentleness of a woman who developed very good instincts about the people around her. He looked at her. Thought about explaining. Decided she deserved the truth. No, he said. Not exactly. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the sky, accepting it the way she seemed to accept most things, not without thought, but without unnecessary resistance. Okay, she said. The courtyard was quiet. Siriidii went on around them in its ancient, vast machinery, the bells, the movements, the millions of lives and their patterns. Below Siriidii, in Rukongai, District 64 went about its evening, and somewhere in the 78th district the history that had made Rukia was still present in the stone of the buildings, and somewhere in the world beyond Siriidii's walls an intelligence that called itself His Majesty was receiving reports and making calculations. Naruto sat in his courtyard and breathed and felt the weight of all of it, not as a burden, not as a weight that would crush him if he let himself feel it, but the way you feel the weight of something real, something that matters, something you've chosen. He'd chosen Konoha once. Built it, defended it, loved it completely. He looked at Soul Society now with the same eyes. And the fox inside him, ancient, enormous, partner and friend and the oldest thing about him, burned steadily in his chest like something that had never gone out and never would. He was here. He was himself. He was not hiding and not afraid and not done. He was just getting started.